interest rates right now, right? I mean, Powell last week said a rate cut in December is not a foregone conclusion.
So there's the biggest problem for the muni market is volatility. So, whether it's through a fund or through an actively managed ETF or an SMA or in a brokerage account, 75 to 80% of municipal risk is still held by mom and pop. When volatility goes up, mom and pop like to raise cash. And in a liquid market, that causes problems. So the biggest thing for us would be some unforeseen, very volatile market.
Credit quality has not been a concern for this market for several years, certainly coming out of the pandemic. Any reason to think that might change in 2026? Because we've had really nothing to worry about.
No, to a large degree, given that we still have above trend GDP growth. The muni market's in a very good situation. A lot of people like to talk about that we have debt to GDP ratios in our country of 125% and growing. If you did that same math for state and local governments, the number's 30%. If you took out a couple of the problem states, it's actually in the mid-teens. So no, in a macro sense, muni credit's at a good spot.
What's the sweet spot right now in muni bonds in terms of maturities?
So we like the 15 to 20 year part of the market where you can pick up about 85% of the value of the curve and get good roll down there.
Are there certain projects you like? Because I think in municipal bonds, we have a sponsored segment every Friday on Bloomberg Intelligence program. And we bring a reporter in here and I'll say, what's the crazy deal you're looking at? Like, is there something that's out there that you think is a little sector that maybe is a little quirky? I mean, not that higher education's quirky, but that's a sector that probably not something that's on everybody's radar screen. But is there a sector out there that you guys like that maybe is not mainstream?
Well, we continue to like flagship universities despite the volatility around all the headlines around taxes and things along those lines.
Are those state universities or are those just like a Harvard or something?
Could be Harvard, could be NYU, could be Cornell.
Okay.
If Tom was here, I would say, it's all the Rochester universities.
Sure.
But they're not just the state universities. We like some of the large transportation projects, toll roads, things like that. Some of the hospital systems, the multi-state diverse hospital system with a diverse payer base we like. There's a lot of good credits out there.
The Q train project's still on hold here in the city, right, to expand it. Or isn't that right? The Second Avenue train line, they want to expand it yet again. That's on hold in large part because of the shutdown. What about stadiums? I remember when Yankee Stadium sold bonds for the new stadium. Mm-hmm. That was a cool one to be a part of. Is that an area where you see some issuance?
It's situational. There's only so many sports teams in the country. Right. They tend to be good credits and they tend to offer you excess spread. But anytime you can, I always say the muni market's a purposeful market. Right, you get to see and touch, what you do and what you finance and what you're a part of.
Which is rare for the investor. Yeah,
it's a lot of fun to be a part of.
Like the Dream Mall over in Jersey, or not? Maybe not.
Dream Mall.
Pat Haskell, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Head of Municipal Bond Group at BlackRock. Let's get a reset here of the market. Get a Bloomberg Business Flash with Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And we have a lot of deal-making news. This one coming through Amazon's cloud unit, Amazon Web Services. It signed a $38 billion deal to supply OpenAI with computing power, and that includes access to hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA GPUs. This is a 7-year deal. It's part of OpenAI's plan to spend about $1.4 trillion on infrastructure to build and power its AI models. So you have Amazon shares. They're up about 5%. Kimberly Clark set to buy Tylenol owner Kenvue, cash and stock deal. Values Kenvue at about $40 billion. Kimberly Clark shares down about 14%. Kenvue, though, up about 17%. And in other news, sources saying Alphabet looking to raise about $15 billion from a bond sale. That deal being offered in as many as 8 parts with maturities ranging from 3 to 50 years. To the markets we go. NASDAQ futures leading the charge up 0.8%, 209 points. S&P futures rising 0.4%, 27 points. Dow futures there little changed. In the yield space, the 2-year 3.60%. That's up 3 basis points. And the yield on the 10-year 4.11%. And that's up about 3 basis points. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index little change. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alexis and Paul.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alexis Christophers sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City. We're streaming live on YouTube as well, so check us out there. We're going to talk emerging markets with Damien Sassower, but let's get the big issue out of the way. University of Texas 34, Vanderbilt 31. Talk to us about Vandy's had a phenomenal season, and the pride of Vanderbilt, by the way, is Damian Sasso.
Yeah. No, it was a nice run, Paul. I mean, we just didn't show up. I mean, we can give Arch Manning all the credit in the world. He hasn't really shown up much this year, but he had a hell of a game, and Vandy's had a hell of a season. I don't think it's over yet, but it's going to be a stretch to see them make the playoffs here.
No. They're going to still make the playoffs.
You think? You think the 12 team?
Well, they're Vanderbilt. I mean, you got to throw a bone out there for these guys. People are going to be asking these guys for jobs going forward. So that's why I always view it at Duke. Be nice to the Dukies because you're going to be working for them.
Be nice to the Doors.
All right. So talk to us about the emerging market here. Where's the play? Where's the juice? What's the conversation you've been having with your clients on the golf course?
Well, it looks like disinflation is really losing its momentum across the whole, not just of emerging, but of developed markets as well. We had central banks super weak last week, but I mean, we have another 9 central banks that are going to announce this week, and all of them are going to leave rates on hold, with the exception of a pair. Maybe Poland and Mexico could cut, but there is just not a lot of scope here for some of these emerging market central banks to continue cutting rates, to continue fueling their bond prices, their underlying performance, and I think that's what we are most focused on here today.
So on the Bloomberg terminal, we have what we call red headlines. They're major news items like Lisa just reported on the Amazon deal and a big offering.
Oh, yeah.
When I see like the bank of XYZ country that I've never heard of has lowered their reserve rate to 34.5% from 36%, I'm like, why are we wasting a red headline on that? But there are people out there like you and other investors. That's important data, right?
Well, I like what you first pointed out. I mean, this is now gearing up for a huge, I mean, primary markets are open for business, and not just in developed markets. I'm talking the Alphabets of the world, the Metas, the HSBCs, the huge, those huge benchmark issues, American, Ford, Blackstone, you name it. It's China, it's Qatar, it's Turkey, it's Jordan, Suriname, and I mean, some of these high yield issuers, you mentioned some of these EM, banks that are issuing debt. I mean, TC Ziraat, a Turkish high yield bank, was able to place $600 million last week. So, primary markets are open for business, and emerging market bondholders are benefiting from that.
So, Damien, you say emerging market debt, one of the year's best performing fixed income asset classes, yet you say inflows remain elusive. So what's going on there?
Well, it's inflows really into emerging market local debt, right? I mean, EM dollar pay debt, I mean, it's going the way of IG and high yield, so I don't think there's any real story there. But yeah, no, I mean, for the better part of the last 10 years, Alexis, we haven't really seen much in the way of inflows into EM local bonds. We started to see things turn through the summer. The momentum is still there, but we're just not really seeing people reach into their pockets, take their hard-earned dollars, and put it to work in emerging markets the way we would have otherwise thought, given the double-digit returns we're seeing this year, something 14, 15, 16% year-to-date. So, yeah, I mean, we'd like to see more, but then you have these risks, Alexis. You have Argentina and the volatility we've seen over the last month due to the election. We have another election in Chile coming up. We have the comments over the weekend about Nigeria, which is a huge issue of emerging market debt.
And what about Venezuela?
That's what I was going to ask.
Venezuela right now is technically off benchmark, right? Because they've been sanctioned and what have you. But there are a ton of PDVSA and Veni bonds that are out there that are owned by a lot of distressed EM creditors. And yeah, we have seen price action there improve quite considerably. But again, it's kind of off benchmark, so it's one of those issuers that you have to have a little bit of an open mandate in order to invest in.
So when I'm sitting on the beaches of Aruba in January working on my Irish tan, I mean, are we going to have issues with Venezuela? So Venezuela, can you invest in
Turks and Caicos or Aruba?
Yes, exactly. Can you invest in Venezuela right now? I mean, if you wanted to?
I mean, the bonds are out there trading. Yeah, I mean, so yes, I mean, they are changing hands. But it's a very closed market. It's a very it's a very liquid market, Paul. So with the bid offers on some of these bonds could be 2 points, 2 full, 3 full points. So it's really hard to kind of get behind that and dig in. I think you're probably best suited to take a diversified approach, especially given where spreads are. I mean, cyclical tight. So you're kind of hard pressed to really invest in any one idiosyncratic issue, or probably better to kind of diversify across a basket of names.
So if you have some money, you want to put it to work in this space, what are you telling folks?
I still like EM local. I mean, I do. I think that
local debt.
EM local government debt, because really at the end of the day, what you're thinking is you're going to get that if the dollar continues its path downward, you're going to see the currency kicker. In addition to the fact that look, EM yields are notably higher than their developed market peers. Although I will say this: if you look at average yield to worst for EM versus U.S. Treasuries, it is at near a 10-year low. So you're not getting as much pickup as you would in years past or months past, but you still get sizable pickup, and I think that's what's driving interest, and I think it's not going away anytime soon.
I'm not sure where we are with our tariff discussions with our friends south of the border in Mexico, but what's in your market? What's the Mexico call these days?
Well, it's the nearshoring theme, right? And that goes well beyond just investing in bonds, right? It goes logistics, commercial real estate. We had Jimmy Hinton of Newmark on, one of our podcasts, a Focus podcast over the weekend. And, that whole theme of spend, AI tech-related spending, Paul, this is real. And it is finding its way into emerging markets like Mexico, like South Korea. There's actually commitments overnight where, into Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, I think, where Microsoft is going to basically be investing in AI data centers. So, there is demand for that from the emerging market complex. And I think the U.S. and some of these Mag 7 names are feeding it.
How much of one's portfolio should be dedicated to EM debt? I think that would be mine. That's my
What
question.
a loaded question that is, Alexis. Let me see your portfolio first, and then I'll decide how much I want to put in there. I mean, look, I think on average people look to put 5%, maybe a little bit more if you're running a diversified fixed income portfolio. Yeah, that makes, or diversified, equity and fixed income portfolio. I'm talking 5% in debt, EM debt, but it's a hard benchmark, and it really depends on each investor, right? Certain investors have different investment policy statements. Certain investors are looking to maximize their risk-adjusted return, not their total return. They're looking to minimize vol in other cases, so it really just depends.
All right, I'm still on the Vanderbilt bandwagon. I think a big bounce back this weekend.
And Miami lost too.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, SMU, that was
Duke
a tough
won.
one.
Thank you. 46-45
The Knicks won.
over at Clemson. Knicks won as well.
The Knicks won, which is a good
Damien
one.
Sassower, thank you so much. Damien Sassower does all the emerging market stuff for Bloomberg Intelligence, and we appreciate getting a few minutes of his time with our news in New York City. Here's Michael Barr.
All right, Paul and Alexis, while on his way back to Washington on board Air Force One, President Trump hinting there could be American boots on the ground in Nigeria after putting pressure on the country over the weekend over claims of Christian persecutions.
They're killing record numbers of Christians in Nigeria. And they have other countries very bad also. You know that part of the world, very bad. They're killing the Christians and killing them in very large numbers. We're not going to allow that to happen.
Well, Trump saying he envisions a lot of things when considering a possible next step. The government shutdown poised to become the longest ever as the impasse between Democrats and Republicans has dragged into a new month. President Trump said he won't be extorted by Democrats who are demanding negotiations to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies. And this week, the Supreme Court's going to consider for the first time whether to say no to President Trump's tariffs. The president deciding against going to the court for the arguments, but stresses that he considers the stakes to be monumental. And Democratic lawmakers calling upon the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee's Republican chair to authorize subpoenas to major banks about any accounts they held for Jeffrey Epstein. That story from Washington. And Bloomberg's Amy Morris.
Bloomberg reported that in addition to their sex crimes investigation, federal prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida spent a year and a half in 2007 and 2008 investigating Epstein for money laundering and operating an unlicensed money transmittal business, details that were not previously disclosed. Now, the committee's Democratic members have identified 21 banks they want subpoenaed, including J.P. Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs, saying these financial institutions had extensive roles in managing Epstein's financial accounts, and that is critical to the committee's investigation. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
An explosion on Harvard University's campus this weekend set off the search for two masked suspects. The incident playing out at the Harvard Goldenson building that normally houses the Department of Neurobiology and other science facilities. Now, Harvard says that building is now reopened. There's no continued threat to the community. Meanwhile, the FBI on scene trying to piece together who did this and why. No word yet as to a possible motive. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm not Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Alexis. You close your eyes, really, is there much of a difference?
You are John Tucker, and you always will be.
Well, speaking of this,
Because nobody else wants to be.
Karen from the Jersey Shore writes in and says she likes John Tucker's scarf.
That's what I've been saying all morning. Thank you very much for noticing.
How about that?
It's an exclusive.
Exactly.
I think there's
ready
only
for the
really
theater or the opera, something.
one in existence, the Bloomberg official scarf.
There you go.
Again, I was given this for being a great employee.
Yep.
Can they take it back?
Can they take it back? All right, very good, John Tucker. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. We got futures here. I'm looking at this Amazon deal. Just the numbers. Amazon.com's cloud union has signed a $38 billion deal to supply a slice of OpenAI bottomless demand for computing power. The numbers are staggering.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Massive deal around AI development this morning. Amazon has signed a $38 billion deal to supply ChatGPT owner OpenAI with computing power, including access to hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA graphics processing units immediately. Amazon joining Microsoft, Oracle, Google as an OpenAI cloud provider in a serious way. Merger Monday, the owner of Kleenex and Huggies, Kimberly-Clark, has agreed to buy the struggling Tylenol maker Kenvue. T-Mobile is teaming up with Capital One to issue its first credit card and Visa without an annual fee, giving rewards on purchases. And the Amazonification of Whole Foods is finally happening years after it bought the grocery chain. Wall Street Journal says Whole Foods introducing robots called ShopBots to fetch you things like Tide Pods and Pepsi. Not exactly the usual organic foods you're probably used to seeing there. This is all in the test phase. In Chicago's flagship store, they've opened this massive kiosk at the entrance, offering things like Kraft mac and cheese and Chips Ahoy cookies. Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg Radio.
I'm Hannah Fry, and as we rely more and more on artificial intelligence in every facet of our lives and businesses, I'm on a mission to find out how we can build the internet that AI needs. Learn more later in the podcast.
Bloomberg Surveillance is your premier destination for the latest on global financial markets. And now we're live on YouTube. I'm Lisa Mateo.
And I'm Tom Keene. Join me, Lisa, Paul Sweeney, and Michael Barr weekday mornings.
Visit the Bloomberg podcast page on YouTube to hear and see the most influential voices on global markets.
The smart way to start your day is with Bloomberg Surveillance, weekdays 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern.
Visit the Bloomberg podcast page on YouTube and click on the live feed to join us today.
Every weeknight, your favorite Bloomberg podcasts are on Bloomberg Radio.
We've been discussing the Federal Reserve's latest moves.
Immigration has become a hot topic in the U.S. Tune in weeknights at 7 Eastern for the best from Odd Lots, The Big Take, Everybody's Business, and all of our podcasts.
Why we're in an AI bubble and what the danger is.
The Podcast Spotlight, weeknights at 7 Eastern.
We learn about a wide variety of subjects.
On Bloomberg Radio, context changes everything. The Podcast Spotlight. The digital economy never sleeps, and neither do the threats against it. Join Bloomberg in New York or online December 8th for Bloomberg Tech Presents, Defending the Digital Economy. Hear from industry leaders, security experts, and innovators as they uncover real-time strategies to protect critical assets and shape the future of cybersecurity. Register now at BloombergLive.com/defending digital economy. This event is proudly sponsored by MasterCard.
Take your Bloomberg Radio listening experience to the next level. Download the Bloomberg Business app today and listen on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. Get live radio, podcasts, and on-demand news updates no matter where you are from coast to coast and across the globe. Plus, expanded details on your favorite shows at the click of a button. The Bloomberg Business app, now on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Download it free in the Apple App Store or on Google Play. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything. Bloomberg Business app. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by BAM Mutual. Put America's strength to work in your portfolio with BAM Insured Municipal Bonds. Protect your investments with an added layer of security and guaranteed income. Invest with strength. Build a stronger tomorrow with BAM Mutual. We've got November trading pointing to a mostly higher open. This is investors. They gear up for earnings from Palantir. That's after the close today. As well as a number of private economic reports on top of that. NASDAQ futures up 0.8%, 224 points. S&P futures rising 0.4%. Dow futures are a little changed, up about 33 points. Over to the yield space, the 2-year 3.60%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.11%, and that's up 3 basis points. Shares of Cipher Mining this morning, they're up about 24%. The reason why they signed a $5.5 billion 15-year lease agreement with Amazon to provide space and power for AI workloads. Then shares of Australia's Iron, they're up about 20%. Word that Microsoft has signed an approximately $9.7 billion deal to purchase AI cloud capacity from that company, and that's making it its largest customer. And shares of power management company Eaton Corp, they're slipping 1%. This after agreeing to buy the Boyd thermal business of Boyd Corp from Goldman Sachs for about $9.5 billion. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, you can subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Alexis and Paul.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alexis Christopher sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney, live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City, and also streaming live on YouTube as well. All right, for those that are concerned about an AI valuation bubble in the marketplace, this headline just drives it home. Amazon Inc.'s $38 billion deal with OpenAI to supply NVIDIA chips. So you get your Amazon, you get your big dollar amount, you get your OpenAI, and you get your NVIDIA. That one headline. Kara Murphy joins us, Chief Investment Officer, Kestra Investment Management. Kara, I'm not sure we've seen anything like this AI type of spend, total dollar spend in an economy. I've never seen it, and I've been doing this a long time, a lot longer than anybody else in this room. Kara, is it an investment risk, do you think, this spending on AI and maybe the valuation associated with that spending? A lot longer than anybody else in this room.
So, I mean, you're right. The numbers are absolutely eye-popping. We're talking about just the largest spenders on the orders of hundreds of billions of dollars this year alone. And over the next couple of years, we easily get into the trillions. So the momentum behind this AI spend is absolutely enormous. That said, I think, to your point, we're in the early days of actually seeing returns on these dollars. So the good news for investors today is that as those billions and potentially trillions of dollars kind of make their way through the economy, there are many other companies that start to benefit from that spend. And so what that means is that we see corporate earnings, not just in those folks who are most directly tied to that AI story, but corporate earnings of other companies, sort of like secondary and tertiary impacts that start to see momentum on the earnings side as well. And I think for the foreseeable future, meaning the next couple of years, it's that momentum in corporate earnings then that will sort of help buoy the market going forward.
But Kara, you say AI is not the only game in town, so do tell, because we're desperate for another game. We just keep talking about this one. Where else is there big opportunity?
So to that point, I mean, what we're seeing is, think about those hundreds of billions of dollars that have to get spent. They have to get spent somewhere. Somebody has to build these data centers and provide the servers and get the power. And so interestingly, all of those data go from artificial intelligence to real economy, very tangible types of products that have to be delivered. And so what you're seeing is particularly industrial companies, ones that are tied to some of these AI needs, are seeing record backlogs. Those backlogs are building. Only a fraction of many of these mega projects have been started. So again, this is a multi-year theme where the infrastructure is going to have to be built out.
Kara, we had a little more than 60% of the S&P 500 report earnings. Are these earnings good enough to support these valuations, do you think?
So far, so good. And, if you go back a couple of quarters and think about when tariffs were first announced in the second quarter, expectations for corporate earnings dropped quite significantly. But remarkably, over the next few months, we saw corporate earnings come in stronger and stronger and stronger. And then the commentary coming from a lot of these CEOs was quite positive heading into the end of the year. So I think so far what we've seen, we're still, relatively early days for this particular earnings season, but what we've seen is, a very high number of companies that are beating expectations. The commentary has been quite positive. So I think that bodes really well for the next couple of quarters, and that there's a lot of momentum in these earnings.
All right, Kara, you're going to stick with us. We'll get back in just a moment. SPX Index, space EA, earnings analysis. And 324 companies out of the S&P 500 reported sales growth 8.2%, earnings growth 11.1%. So some margin expansion there. So good top line, Good bottom line.
Tariffs.
Yep.
Well, the government shutdown, I guess, is too new to have affected those numbers. But there were a lot of headwinds, seemingly.
It's what Tom Keene says over and over again. Companies adapt, consumers adapt, and that's what you get. And you got the S&P futures up 35 points. And I hear the bell. That means we go. Luis Mateo for the opening.
You're right. And let's see if we kick things off in the green. And it looks like we are S&P 500 up 0.5%, 36 points over to the level 6,876. We go to the Dow up 0.1%, 39 points at 47,590. And finally, we go to the Nasdaq up up about 1% at 230 points, 23,953. In the yield space, we have the 2-year at 3.60%. That's up 3 basis points. Over to the 10-year, 4.11%, and that's up 3 basis points. COMEX gold up 0.6% at $4,021 an ounce. And we have Brent crude, little change at about $64 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, that's up about 0.1%. And at the open, we want to check in with shares of Kimberly-Clark. They're down 12%. Kenvue up about 15%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Alexis and Paul.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. We're speaking with Kara Murphy. She is Chief Investment Officer at Kestra Investment Management here. Kara, how do you think about market cap allocation here? It's just been, boy, if you're a big cap growth, boom, you're crushing it. How do you think about other ways, whether it's small cap, mid cap? Is there any reason to spend time there?
Yes, and I think that story has changed over the last couple of years. I mean, in the rearview mirror, it's those mega cap names are bust. If you didn't own some of the big names, you were really left behind. But what we've seen is, particularly if you take, let's say, the Mag 7 and the contribution that they had to the S&P 500 earnings, a couple of years ago, it was 2/3 of the S&P earnings were coming from just those 7 names. Last year, it was 50%. This year, we're looking at about 1/3. So what that means is that you don't necessarily need to see these names turn down, but as we think about, that spending, that earnings power sort of comes downstream, it also goes down market cap as well. And so mid cap, small cap, smaller, large cap are starting to see some of those benefits of better earnings. And then throw on top of that, you have some of these lower short-term interest rates, so they're feeding their way into the financing markets. Small caps tend to be much more dependent on borrowing, and they're starting to see those benefits of lower borrowing costs feed through to the bottom line. So I think all of that means that you need to make sure that you sort of start to shift your exposure, make sure that you're in some of these other places and not just completely exposed to those mega caps.
So yeah, I mean, over at Kestra Investment, Kara, it looks like you're positioning with a tilt outside the U.S. And it's interesting because, Paul, one of the trends of our show this morning has been opportunities outside the U.S. And specifically, we talked a lot about emerging markets. So I'm wondering where you're seeing the opportunities outside the U.S. right now.
And remember that it's been over a decade that the U.S. market has led non-U.S. markets. So we do think that this is the beginning of a larger shift. And we saw it earlier this year with the U.S. dollar declining. The U.S. dollar has been kind of the preeminent currency for a very, very long time. And again, it doesn't mean it's going away, but I think many investors around the world are looking to diversify their currency exposure. That helps investments outside the U.S. And meanwhile, we're overweight equities in general, but part of that overweight is owning more outside the U.S., both in developed non-U.S. and in emerging markets, where we think we have both currency and we have some sort of like relative momentum that starts to pick up in those markets.
Kara, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Kara Murphy, Chief Investment Officer for Kestra Investment Management. Again, the AI trade, Alexis, just with this deal with Amazon and OpenAI and the NVIDIA chips and the dollar amount of $38 billion, it seems like we get one of these announcements every couple of days, and the dollar amounts are just staggering. And, I'd be interested to see some analysis where if you strip that out, all that investment out of the U.S. economy, what's the rest of the economy doing? It's obviously a lower growth rate, but I wonder how low.
But despite all of that, companies like Alphabet are issuing bonds.
Yep.
to raise money, even though they're sitting on a bunch of cash, because of all their AI spend.
So the equity markets are supporting the AI strategy clearly, and we've seen that time and time again, most notably with NVIDIA stock. But now you get some real confirmation from the bond market that it also is supportive of this investment. Again, the Meta deal from last week, they did $25 billion in bonds.
And there's an analyst over at Loop who now says NVIDIA can be an $8.5 trillion company, just crossed the $5 trillion mark a few days ago.
Exactly. So we'll stay on top of this because it certainly is topical. The NASDAQ up 0.9% here today, double the performance of the S&P 500. So yet again, tech leading the way. We'll have more coming up.
This is your only 24-hour source for world markets and breaking business news. Bloomberg Radio. Coming up, the latest market-moving headlines from Bloomberg. First, an update from our partners at CBS News. Breaking business news.
CBS News Brief. President Trump tells CBS's 60 Minutes he's willing to work with Democrats on health care reform once they reopen the government. Another option?
If we had the filibuster, we could do exactly what we want.
It's day 34, and the shutdown continues to delay operations at the nation's airports as unpaid air traffic controllers continue to sick out. James Barnes' flight didn't get off the ground on time.
There was an impact. I mean, we want to get home. It's tough, and I really don't like waiting. We want to get home.
Election day is tomorrow, and in California, the big issue is redistricting. Correspondent Ed O'Keefe.
Proposition 50, they call it, backed by Governor Gavin Newsom, would redraw most of the state's 53 congressional seats to favor Democrats. And they're doing that, of course, in response to Texas, which redrew its map to favor Republicans.
Governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia could reveal what's ahead for both political parties. CBS News Brief. I'm Deborah Rodriguez.
Live business news, breaking global headlines, and conversations with the names that move markets. Listen to Bloomberg Radio on command anywhere you have an Amazon Alexa device. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg Radio.
Hello.
Listen to Bloomberg
There's
Radio
nothing
on
worse
command
than receiving a notice from the IRS stating you owe money. You need to listen. The IRS is preparing to send out millions of notices to individuals and business owners. Don't take on the IRS alone. SMIB Management, located in San Diego, specializes in IRS cases. Whether it's money owed, an audit, wage garnishment, or bank levy, they represent you. Visit SMIBmanagement.com. Don't let an IRS notice stop your life. Visit SMIBmanagement.com today. They represent you. Visit SMIB.
Hey player, the all-new Hamul Casino Resort is all yours. The hotel tower with some seriously luxurious suites. Hey player, the super secret speakeasy. Hey, could you make that too? The indulgent spa retreat. Ah. And the epic rooftop pool in Cabanas. It's all for you at the all-new Hamul Casino Resort, the player's place. Book your experience at HamulCasino.com.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. Edition podcast, we discussed what President Trump had to say about the government shutdown in his 60 Minutes interview with Terry Haynes, the founder of Pangea Policy.
I don't think we heard anything new, but I think what we heard was more transparent and expressed more plainly than the kind of the fog of negotiation, the fog of war that we've heard before. What this is Trump saying essentially, I mean, of course, reiterating the Trump and Republican position that they're not going to negotiate the health care extension over holding the government, as they would put it, hostage. But what Trump is saying very plainly is, look, you can actually have a victory, and I'm interested in having you have one. You end the government shutdown, and I'll engage in negotiations with you to actually to make things better, faster, cheaper.
How do you see that playing out, though, Terry? Because it's been more than a month now, and the Democrats have held pretty firm on their position that they want to see an extension of those expiring subsidies for affordable health care before they'll agree to vote to reopen the government.
Well, I see it a couple of ways. One is that I've been saying this since before the shutdown started. I see it a couple of ways. One is that this is not a this is not a substantive position over health care. But until about 2 weeks before the shutdown, it was not clear what grounds the Democrats might use in order to shut the government down, and they eventually picked health care because they thought it was a good issue for them.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. Edition podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have stocks mostly higher. This has Amazon's $38 billion deal with OpenAI. Added some fuel to that AI trade. Amazon shares up about nearly 5%. A renewed advance in equities, putting the S&P 500 close to its all-time highs. Let's get right to it. S&P 500 up 0.2%, 16 points at 6,856. We have the Dow down about 0.1%, 49 points. The Nasdaq up 0.7%, 167 points. In the yield space, we have the 2-year 3.60%. That's up 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.11%, and that's up 3 basis points. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index. That's rising about 0.1%. In company news, Tesla's faulty door handles, they are back in the spotlight. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, they say they received more consumer complaints about them after launching that investigation back in mid-September. And Berkshire Hathaway's cash pile getting bigger, soaring to a fresh record of $381.7 billion last quarter, while operating earnings surged about 34%. And BP sold non-controlling stakes in U.S. shale assets to 6th Street for $1.5 billion. The shares are up about 0.5% in London. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alexis and Paul.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. We've got Alexis Christopher sitting in for Tom Keene here today. I'm Paul Sweeney, live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. The Acela train, Amtrak, on time from Philadelphia. That means Eric Balchunas is in the studio. That is our proxy for all things Amtrak and Northeast Corridor train service, whether he actually comes to work or not. So Eric Balchunas joins us here, senior ETF analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Otherwise, he just sits around in Philly eating cheesesteaks and trying to explain what a mummer is. The Mummers Parade, go look that up, people, if you don't know in other parts of the country. I've watched Mummers Parade my entire life. I have no idea what those people do. Eric, thanks so much for joining us here on ETF Biz. We've got a market, Eric, that's making just all-time highs every single day. How's that reflected in the ETF world? Do people try to take contrarian bets? Is there a way to just ride it with triple X Qs or whatever you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I address the mummers real quick?
Yes.
Yeah. The way I describe the mummers to people is take the Rose Parade and do the complete opposite. So the people watching in the stands are actually in the parade.
Yes.
Okay, because I was unfamiliar with
it's
this.
inmates overtaking the asylum kind of a parade. But anyway, you should go.
Google Mummers Parade. It is
right after the show. I'm going to do
They
this.
go straight from New Year's Eve right into the parade. It's a trip. Yeah. Anyway, so we put a note out today. Athanasios, my colleague, did about how bears face extinction in a market that's forgotten how to fall. And look, the Qs are up 50% since April, right? It's ridiculous. Everybody thought this wouldn't be. So in the flows, it's obviously really powerful. ETFs have just broken the record at 1.1 trillion year to date. Last year was 1.1 trillion, so we still have 2 months left. So they're going to obviously add to the record.
This is inflows?
Inflows, yeah. So net cash buying. It's a big number. Where's the money going? Okay, it's going to VU, which is 100, but basically about 10% of that number. VU is like a monster. Then you've also got other S&P, the Qs, but you do also have this gold buying and a little bit of treasury buying. So people are kind of buying a hedge as they keep buying U.S. equities. So it's not full-on unadulterated bullishness. It's sort of like bullishness, but you're also sort of buying a little protection why you're being bullish. And I think that's sort of been the whole spirit of the year. And we think that a lot of the buy and hold investors, the problem with like bearishness right now is that they have been really burned by market timing. So they're like, oh, the hell with it. I'm just going to stay invested. And the other thing is they feel like they found really good products. Like VU is like 3 basis points for the S&P. S&P 500. So there's no reason to switch funds. You feel like you have the best deal. So I always equate it to getting married. You're done dating these other funds. You're like, I am married to VU or IVV, and I'm never leaving. And so that creates a stickiness that really, I think, helps the baseline of the market. And then if you add traders on top of that being bullish, that's when you get a year like this.
I'm glad you pointed out gold rising in tandem with equities, because it's a phenomenon that just you don't see it happen often, and we certainly are in a big way this year. But I want to talk about new opportunities for investors in ETFs, because we got some guidance from the SEC when it comes to crypto, and now we're seeing that in the way of these new crypto ETFs going to launch. Tell us what we can expect there.
Yeah, it's been wild. So the government shut down, and we didn't think that the crypto ETFs, they've launched Bitcoin and Ether spot. Those have been out for a while. So with the ones on deck are Solana and XRP. We're like, okay, we'll have to just wait till the SEC comes back. Well, the ETF industry is very opportunistic, so they figured out like a little loophole in some guidance the SEC offered, and Bitwise went to market with a spot Solana ETF. The ticker is BSOL, and it had the most volume, about 55 million on day one of any of the 800 ETFs launched this year. So huge, big hit first day, and it took in 450 million in the first week, which is a good amount. It's not quite what the Bitcoin ETFs did. They're phenomenons. But for any other launch, it was a big launch, and so they're pretty excited. So Spot Solana is now up and running, and the next one they're trying to put out is XRP. So we think they're probably going to be able to use this little loophole to start launching these spot ETFs. We could see Dogecoin, XRP, Avalanche, right down the line. There's about 9 of them that qualify to be launched in spot format based on the SEC's new guidance, which basically says the coin has to be have futures on it on a regulated exchange, not a regulated, but a surveilled exchange. Anyway, long story short, that's about 9 or 10 coins. We have 3 of them out now, so we're gonna have another 7 probably launching, and then beyond that, there could be some crazy shenanigans with like meme coins and whatnot. But most of the money will be in those big 1, 2, or 3, and then ultimately, what we thought was interesting is T. Rowe Price filed for an active crypto picking fund, which I'm like, wow, that's like a hello fellow kids moment right there. But that shows you that the times we're at. We do think crypto baskets and active crypto funds in the next 5 or 10 years could be pretty useful to people, because they might just be like, I don't want to pay attention to this. I'll just buy the top 50 or the top 30 or the top 20, like the S&P 500. Set it and forget it.
Equities, of course.
Or the next hot manager could come from this space, because there's no Wall Street research on it. So there's a lot of unknowns, and the volatility is there, and there's a lot of dispersion. So we think we could see the next star manager emerge from this space.
Every time this guy comes in, I got a million more questions than when he walked in here. Eric Balchunas, senior ETF analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence. Folks, he is the absolute axe on all things ETFs on the street. Go to BI Go to get to his research on the Bloomberg terminal. Eric Balchunas with that. With our news in New York City.
Who is it?
John Tucker.
Yay!
Right. The government shutdown now on its way to being the longest in history. And in an interview on CBS's 60 Minutes, President Trump repeated his call for Senate Republicans to get rid of the filibuster and reopen the government without Democratic votes.
They've never had this. This has happened like 18 times before, and the Democrats always voted for an extension, always saying, give us an extension, we'll work it out. They've lost their way. They've become crazed lunatics.
But Democratic Senator Tim Kaine says the president needs to negotiate on their demand to extend expiring Obamacare subsidies.
We're looking for the president to agree that a deal is a deal. Thus far, he's refused to engage, and we avoid shutdowns or get out of shutdowns all the time when the president engages.
Virginia Senator Tim Kaine appearing on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays right here on Bloomberg Radio. Nigeria is reeling from President Trump's claim over the weekend that Christians are being systematically killed in the West African country. The idea of a genocide against Christians in Nigeria, it has been floating around right-wing circles in the West for years. President Trump's intervention and his threat to use military force and cut off all aid marks an escalation amid claims from U.S. right-wing politicians, commentators, and European lawmakers that citizens are being targeted for their religion. This week, the Supreme Court will hear arguments on whether President Trump has overstepped federal law with many of his tariffs. A ruling against him could limit or even take away that swift and blunt leverage that much of his foreign policy has relied upon, the president increasingly has expressed agitation and anxiety about the looming decision in the case he says is one of the most important in U.S. history. He also says he won't now attend the oral arguments as he suggested he may do earlier. And the fountain pen making a comeback. The Wall Street Journal says cheap replicas are also flooding the market for the old-timey pens. That's rankling fans of the product, long known for steep prices. The Reddit group dedicated to fountain pens has doubled over the past 5 years, 368,000 users. By the way, if the Karen in Milwaukee wants to make a bid for this.
Karen from the Jersey Shore.
Oh, from the Jersey Shore.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I think I know who that is.
Well, she may still need a scarf.
I can part with this.
For the right price.
Oh, that is a Bloomberg scarf. When did that come out? I didn't get that.
Oh, you haven't been tracking the Bloomberg fashion line?
No, not. I've been here 16 years. I got nothing.
Bloomberg merch, please.
Anyway, global news 24 hours a day. Whatever you wanted with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. I think I might have pilfered a Bloomberg umbrella from somebody's desk out of desperation, but that's the only thing I've got.
You deserve more than that.
The interns come in here. When they come in, they got a huge bag of swag. I mean, they got the whole thing. So we take care of the interns. But for people like John and I, not so much. We're just throws to the wolves here. S&P 500 up 12 points. NASDAQ up 160. They got the whole thing. 0.6%. This is Bloomberg. For people like John and I, not so much. We're just
breaking political news from the team that knows D.C.
A breaking story. Greg Storer, Bloomberg Supreme Court reporter with us.
Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines, along with D.C.'s most respected news team.
Live from the White House, Bloomberg Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall.
Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
We welcome Gregory Cordy, Bloomberg Politics reporter.
Listen live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern, or on demand wherever you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything. Listen live weekdays at noon.
Stay connected with Bloomberg wherever you are with Bloomberg Podcasts. On the Big Take Asia, an American toy maker struggles to break up with China. On Odd Lots, the movement that wants us to care about AI model welfare. And on Trumponomics, Mexico's high-stakes gamble in dealing with President Trump. Listen to Bloomberg Podcasts on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Podcasts. Context changes everything. Listen to Bloomberg Podcasts on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg.
The stories that moved markets today.
Concerns about iPhone sales in China.
And the insight that will shape trading tomorrow.
Traders are waiting to hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell.
The Bloomberg Business Week Daily Podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stennebeck.
Technology and consumer staples among the biggest winners.
The rally taking a bit of a breather.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Listen live weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app and anywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Merger Monday on Wall Street. The owner of Kleenex and Huggies, Kimberly Clark, has agreed to buy the struggling Tylenol maker Kenvue. Massive deal around AI development this morning. Amazon has signed a $38 billion deal to supply ChatGPT owner OpenAI with computing power, including access to hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA graphics processing units. The share of consumers in the subprime credit risk category has reached levels not seen in years. That's a sign a growing number of borrowers are in poor financial health, according to TransUnion. And forget about support groups for women or racial and other minorities or LGBTQ groups. Men's groups at large corporations are now becoming a thing, focusing on men's physical, emotional, and financial health. Things like cancer, becoming a new father, and andropause, helping men talk about things. Some companies say the groups also prevent what they call toxic masculinity. Some of the groups also welcome women. Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg Radio.
On a recent edition of the Big Take podcast, WNBA players want more of the league's revenue. Will they get it? Host David Gura explores what's on the line for one of the fastest growing sports leagues in the world.
At this year's WNBA All-Star Game, players wore T-shirts that read, "Pay us what you owe us." It was a big statement. Here's ESPN reporter and Good Game host Sarah Spain.
So right now, they're getting less than 10% of the WNBA revenue compared to about 50% that NBA players get. And at the crux of it is the league side wants them to get higher salaries salaries, but they want their revenue to be affected by certain stipulations, a predetermined rate, whereas the players want their revenue to go up, their salary cap to go up, all of those things to be dependent on growth along with the revenue that they're creating for the league.
I want to dig into the revenue sharing piece of this a bit more, and you brought up the contrast between the WNBA and the NBA. So can you spell that out a bit more explicitly?
Well, we'll give you the extremes. Okay. So as of the most recent report, Steph Curry is the highest paid NBA player, plays for the Warriors, and Jackie Young is one of the highest paid WNBA, and Steph Curry makes 230 times as much money as Jackie Young. There was a great op-ed in the New York Times by Nobel Prize-winning economist Claudia Goldin, and one of the very tricky things about discussing this issue is that there is such a lack of financial transparency from the NBA, WNBA league side. So according to Claudia Goldin's numbers based on game attendance, TV viewership, all the other stuff, WNBA players should make somewhere around a quarter of what NBA players are making, and they're making an 80th.
That's what's on a recent edition of the Big Take podcast. Listen to the full episode on Apple, Spotify, the Bloomberg Business app with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Listen to the full episode on Apple.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, we got Alexis Christopher sitting in for Tom Keene on Paul Sweeney Live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. We were just talking ETFs with Eric Balchunas because, well, we have to. We do that on Monday. But our next guest is a respectable journalist. I'm not sure why we're talking ETFs with Isabel Lee, cross-asset reporter for Bloomberg News. Round Hill Financial has submitted paperwork to launch an exchange-traded fund that would replicate the U.S. government's capital allocation strategy. Is that something we want to replicate? I don't know. Isabel, thanks for joining us here in studio. Talk to us about Round Hill Financial and what they're doing.
So Round Hill it's one of those upstart issuers that really jump on the hot, crazy trends, because you're never going to compete, as Eric would say, with VU, with SPY, with those big guys. So how do you stand out in the $13 trillion ETF space in the U.S., which, by the way, just hit $13 trillion this morning? It's to come up with something exciting, crazy, or something that will make people's jaw drop, basically. So this one is interesting because the U.S. doesn't have a sovereign wealth fund, unlike other companies, other nations. But then Round Hill still proposes that they will try to track the U.S. capital allocation strategy by investing in publicly disclosed investments. And I feel like this is a good time because this year we saw really Washington take a playbook off of Wall Street. I mean, this administration has invested in Intel, in Trilogy Metals, in Lithium Americas, and U.S. Steel. So
I see what you're saying.
Yes.
The equity investments that the U.S.
Yes. Stakes in. Okay. Because I thought, are we talking about lawmakers and what stocks they're buying? I mean,
we have those already.
Right.
We have the NANs for the Democrats and we have for the Republican Party. But this is just America in general. And how do you say this? The reception is mixed because some people are saying that, yes, it's about time. And we have Peter Cheer of Academy Securities, who's really all in production for security. He said this will be the new ESG. It's about time that Washington plays a stronger investment role in the economy. But some people are also saying that, wait a minute, the heavy-handed tactics of the government might distort markets. And do we really want that? And another thing is, are you going to invest in speculation or just deals that have been announced? Because then if you do the latter, you might miss the pop. The prospectus, though, doesn't lay that out just yet.
So far, though, the government's done pretty well with its investments.
Yes. I mean, if you look at Intel, that for sure is really great. I mean, it soared. Although I must point out that it soared because of its relation with an NVIDIA deal and not really the
U.S. just sort of rode that wave.
Yes, but still, it's up massively. So there is that. It's an interesting time, and not to mention the SEC is in shutdown, so
right.
They're affected by that, so who knows whether this will even be approved. But
I saw in this story that you spoke with Peter Cheer of Academy Securities, and we spoke to Peter Cheer.
On the show last week.
He's got a theme, an investment theme of production for security, i.e., investing in those industries, those companies that enhance, I guess, security for the United States, not just military security, but economic security as well.
And he's really really leaning heavily on that. He said owning what the government buys makes sense on many fronts, and as a massive consumer, the government can direct their spending to whatever companies that they want to invest in, whether it's just a signal or encouragement. I mean, whatever the government announced can move markets. So.
And especially when you're looking at a crowded market and you want to differentiate yourself. This is sort of an interesting idea.
I know, and the ticker is also kind of fun. It's USAG, so there is that.
There you go.
I know.
So again,
what a time.
Round Hill Financial has submitted paperwork to launch an exchange-traded fund that would replicate the U.S. government's investments. Now,
whether it's just a signal or encouragement.
The SEC is shut down, correct? So nothing's really getting done, IPOs or any of that kind of stuff?
Nothing is getting done, but they did have a bulletin out on September 30 saying that they will still, I mean, so when you submit an ETF paperwork, there will be a time, a number of days, and that's still going to count. It's not like everything is in standstill. So the clock is ticking with this one.
All right, very good. Isabel Lee, cross-asset reporter, Bloomberg News, bringing us another ETF story. So there you go.
Fascinating stuff. Thanks.
But still, I mean, Isabel just saying 13 trillion is the ETF market. Eric just came out with a little nugget of, another trillion of inflows already year to date, and we still got another couple of months
left.
Go.
Yeah, very popular. But got to talk the marathon. Did you see the New York City Marathon this weekend?
Yep.
How about that finish?
Phenomenal finish.
Right? Benson Kipruto of Kenya beating out a fellow Kenyan by less than a second.
Yep, extraordinary. And the people were out in just force. It was a great New York City day.
I live not far from the 59th Street Bridge, so I always go out and watch them come off the bridge. It's a great time in the race.
People were out in all 5 boroughs supporting the runners. Again, it's a classically great New York City day.
A record for a female runner as well.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much. That is it for Bloomberg Surveillance. Bloomberg Intelligence coming up in just moments. This is
Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, an update from our partners at CBS News.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Knockbox.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez. The government shutdown is now 34 days old, and if it runs into tomorrow, it'll set a new record. Over the weekend, SNAP food benefits ran out for 42 million Americans. 2 judges have ordered the White House to restore it. Correspondent Natalie Brand is in Washington.
On social media, President Trump said, quote, "If we're given the appropriate legal direction by the court, it will be my honor to provide the funding, just like I did with military and law enforcement."
Lynette Hicks, among the Americans who've been cut off.
The grocery store doesn't care about your political affiliation. Political affiliation doesn't mean anything to people like myself that are receiving these benefits.
The FAA reports almost half of the 30 busiest airports in the nation are dealing with shutdown-related shortages of air traffic controllers. President Trump is defending deployment of federal troops to places like Chicago and Portland. He tells CBS's 60 Minutes.
We're cleaning up our cities. You know, I campaigned on crime, but I've done a much better job on crime than I thought. You know, the crime numbers are way down, even though we have a lot more people in our country that really shouldn't be here, and many of them are stone-cold, hard criminals.
There's a new chapter in the legal standoff between the Trump administration and Portland. CBS's Jim Krasula.
A federal judge has again blocked the Trump administration from deploying the National Guard to Portland, Oregon, until at least Friday. The judge said she, quote, found no credible evidence that protests in the city got out of control before the president federalized the troops several weeks ago.
Public safety officials tell CBS News it appears fireworks placed in a wooden box or a lockbox were at the center of an explosion in the hallway of a Harvard Medical School building over the weekend. This student was stunned.
I just woke up, huge bang, like I felt it in my body, was really scared. My heart was racing, and then tried to fall asleep, and then like 5 minutes later I heard another bang.
Police have released pictures of 2 masked people seen running from the scene. They believe the blast was intentional. No one was hurt. Their teachers wince, but more British kids are speaking like Americans. CBS's Vicky Barker from London.
Blame TikTok, Netflix, or YouTube, but a growing number of British teachers say they've caught their students referring to apartments instead of flats, or elevators instead of lifts. And the younger the child, the stronger that transatlantic influence. More than 50% of primary school teachers surveyed by the Times of London say they've caught their kids using American words or American accents, compared to only a third of secondary school teachers.
The Dow is down 188 points in early trading. This is CBS News.
Visit thenocbox.com this holiday season and use code CBS16 to save 16% on the knockbox of your choosing and get this vital task done before the new year. Thenocbox.com. Promo code CBS16.
Hi, it's CBS health and wellness expert Cooper Lawrence. All across the country, families are making their holiday plans, coming together for cherished traditions and to show their love and care for one another. One of the most meaningful things you can do for your family this season is organize your important estate documents with the Knockbox. Most families spend over 500 hours trying to untangle an estate after someone passes, all while grieving. The Knockbox was created to remove that burden. It makes organizing all of your documents simple so you can leave behind memories, not a mess. Proper planning is a gift of love, and the Knockbox helps ensure your will, financial info, even plans for your pet is in one safe place, ready when your family needs it most. Visit thenocbox.com this holiday season and use the code CBS16 to save 16% on the Knockbox of your choosing and get this vital task done before the new year. That's the NOKBox.com, promo code CBS16. Thenocbox.com. Thenocbox.com. Get organized and save. Ensure your will, financial info, even plans for your pet is in one safe
Lots of baseball fans tuned in Saturday night.
Preliminary Nielsen ratings say the deciding World Series game averaged nearly 26 million viewers on Fox. 530,000 more streamed it. The game peaked at 31.5 million viewers as the game went into extra innings.
Smith hits a high fly ball to deep left field. It's got a chance. It is gone.
The Dodgers beat the Blue Jays thanks to that Will Smith home run. The numbers are the best for baseball in 8 years since Game 7 of the 2017 series drew more than 28 million viewers. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
Buy pasta made in Italy? Prices could be skyrocketing. The Commerce Department has threatened to slap tariffs of almost 92% on Italy's largest exporters. U.S. officials accuse them of dumping everything from rigatoni to radiatori at cheap prices. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
Game 7 of the 2017 series drew more than 28 million viewers. Steve Kathan.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney.
How do you think the Fed is looking at tariffs, the uncertainty of tariffs?
Let's take a look at the sectors and how they performed.
A lot of investors getting whipsawed every day by news events.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Could we see a market disruption, a market event?
Are people just too exuberant out there?
You see some so-called low-quality stocks driving this short-term rally.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
Good Monday morning from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City to our worldwide audience. We're streaming live on YouTube. Head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Local Podcast, and that's where you'll find us, Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney, with you for this Bloomberg Intelligence program. We got a lot coming up over the next 2 hours. Break down some earnings, some M&A deals, a lot going on out there. Another AI deal out there with Amazon, so a lot going on. We'll get to it all. We had some economic data came out today, not from the government. ISM manufacturing data came out, and U.S. factory activity shrank in October for the 8th straight month, driven by a pullback in production and tepid demand. Get some details on that. Susan Spence joins us. She's the chair for ISM Manufacturing PMI for the Institute of Supply Management. Susan, I guess stubbornly weak manufacturing data out there. How did you guys read it?
Yeah, not surprised. That's how we read it. So as you saw with our numbers, we're down to 48.7, which is a drop from last month. Last month, you know, I talked about seeing small upticks that travel through the supply chain and then disappear. That's indeed what's going on. Our demand indicators are all still in contraction. Each was up a bit, but production is back down. We had 1 month in expansion, and that bubble seems to have moved through supply chain. So our panelists are telling us the same thing they've been telling us since about the March-April timeframe. They're consumed with tariff chaos. About 54% of the panelists cited that as still really consuming their time and driving their business in the wrong direction. Sentiment is still pretty bad. Demand is soft. soft, and we just have folks that want the trade conflict to be over so that they could move on and understand what the cost of the product is going to be. We also talked about the GDP, the percent of manufacturing in GDP is down a bit from 67 to 58%. Normally, that could be good news, but strong contraction, 41% of all of U.S. manufacturing, up from 28% last month, is in strong contraction. So that is not good.
Okay, so it's a picture that is not great. Given that the government is shut down, we have no official data. Susan, do you get a lot more inquiries on the data and how you compute it and what it means? I'm just curious how much more of a spotlight this report now gets.
41%. Yeah, I have more interviews this month, so if that's any indication. I do hope more people are looking at it. What I love about our data is that we have 18 sectors covered, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies, and they are various, from transportation equipment to food and beverage to petroleum. And we just we have the frontline purchasing managers telling us what's going on with prices, production, employment, right? Hiring, firing. We still have a lack of backfilling. So we believe it's a great microcosm of the sector. And, because it's about the 8th month now since we've seen these indicators, we worry. And we do feel that manufacturing, although it's only 10% of employment, is really a bellwether for what's going on with the rest. Seems to be no end in sight. And then once trade deals are done, there's going to be a period of time where people don't believe that they won't change again, because that's also been part of chaos.
All right, Susan, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Susan Spence, she's the chair for ISM Manufacturing PMI for the Institute of Supply Management. Again, those numbers came out showing U.S. factory activity shrank in October for the 8th straight month, and that's driven by a pullback in production and tepid demand. So we'll stay on top of that story. Let's get a look at this market here. We'll go to Lisa Mateo for a Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa.
You got it. This Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Van Eck. It was founded in 1955. Van Eck has been guiding by conviction, not convention, spotting change early and turning it into opportunity from the very start. Well, we have a lot of deal-making news to kick off the new trading month. First off, Amazon's $38 billion deal with OpenAI. It's added some fuel to the AI trade. Amazon shares, well, they're up about nearly 5%. Its cloud unit is going to provide OpenAI with access to hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA GPUs as part of this 7-year deal. Now, some more news surrounding Amazon. We also have shares of Cipher Mining because they're on the rise, up 31%. That's after signing a $5.5 billion 15-year lease agreement with Amazon. That's to provide space and power for its AI workloads. And in other deal-making news, Kimberly-Clark set to buy Tylenol owner Kenvue. It's a cash and stock deal. Values Kenvue at about $40 billion. So we look at Kimberly-Clark, their shares down nearly 12%. Kenvue shares up more than 17%. To the markets we go. Let's start with the S&P 500, up 0.1%, 7 points. The level, 6,848. We go to the NASDAQ, up 0.6%, 143 points. And the Dow right now down about 0.3%, 152 points. Over to the yield space, the 2-year 3.59%. That's up 1 basis point. And the yield on the 10-year 4.10%, and that's up about 2 basis points. We have the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. Some private economic reports. You talked about ISM, but also S&P Global Manufacturing PMI for October. Expectation was for 52.2, came in a tick higher at 52.5. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Thorland Paul.
Thank you so much, Lisa Mateo, with our Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go now to Market Drivers. Market Drivers is brought to you by Commonwealth. Join over 2,000 independent financial advisors who are taking control of their growth with advisor-centric support and future-ready technologies. Grow on your own terms with a partner dedicated to your success. Go to commonwealth.com to learn more. All right, Christine Aquino, the managing editor for Bloomberg Markets Live, is here with us for our Market Drivers, and it's an M&A Monday, Christine.
It's an M&A Monday. Monday, Scarlett. How about we start with Kenvue over here? So Kenvue, ticker KVUE. This is the maker of Tylenol, and their shares are whopping today, up 17% from the open. And that is because there is a deal that Kimberly-Clark will be buying the company for $40 billion. And so the combination of both of these companies creates a company with $32 billion in revenue, and that makes them the second biggest seller of health and wellness products after Procter & Gamble. So this is a monster deal. Kenvue shareholders will get $3.50 per share in cash. And so, you know, a lot of analysts weighing in, our own Bloomberg Intelligence's Diana Gomez and Daria Lima saying that this just reinforces the view that Kenvue was in need of big investment, and you know, if they were going to do that on their own, that meant that they were going to have to sacrifice midterm profit. But now we have Kimberly-Clark swooping in and providing some fresh capital in here, and hopefully helping them to really improve their sales.
If you look at the stock of Kimberly-Clark, it's down 12% today on the news. This suggests to me that the street's saying, what? I mean, A, did you overpay? B, maybe not as many synergies as that you're suggesting. That's, you don't like to see that.
But that's typical for an acquiring company for the stock to go down.
It seems a little bit more. If I were the banker, I would say to expect a 5 or 6 or 7%.
I see.
This seems
the
a little
scope
bit
of the decline.
Speaking of bankers, J.P. Morgan and PJT Partners were advising the acquirer, and Centerview Partners and Goldman Sachs advising Kenvue. So bankers getting paid. That's what I like to see. What else you got?
Let's take a look at Amazon, shall we, Paul? So Amazon ticker AMZN, another winner this morning. Shares are up more than 4%, and of course that is because of their deal. Well, Amazon Web Services deal with OpenAI, ChatGPT maker. They're going to be providing hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA GPUs, graphic processing units, as part of a 7-year deal worth $38 billion. So, you know, AWS was actually a bit of a laggard in the space. You know, they've kind of stepped back, but now they're joining the ranks of companies that are building or retrofitting data centers to back OpenAI. And so we actually got Bloomberg Intelligence's Mandeep Singh and Robert Bigger kind of weighing in on the deal. $38 billion over 7 years. Sounds big, but it's actually smaller than a lot of other OpenAI's compute deals. It's about 6 to 8 times smaller than the deals that they have with Microsoft and Oracle. So there's definitely room for that to grow.
Context matters.
Exactly. And so, you know, lots of room there, especially because AWS is a leader in this space. And so, and from OpenAI's perspective, it seems like this is them really seeking to diversify their computing power, right? Because they already have deals with Microsoft, Oracle, but then they really want a broad base of support for this so that they can bolster their advantage over other LLMs.
And to your point, who has OpenAI not signed a deal with at this point, right? Microsoft, yes. Oracle, yes. Alphabet, yes. CoreWeave, yes. Who's left?
Who's funding these guys?
Sam Altman has been traveling the world looking for investors.
All right.
Christmas comes early for all
Love
of you.
to see that capital structure there.
Last one that you're watching.
Well, another AI related. Of course. So we're looking at IREN. So ticker IREN. Those shares are up 19%. So extending those gains from the open. So okay, get this. IREN, it's a renewable energy company based in Sydney. They mostly have Australian clients, but you know they are listed in the U.S. And now they just signed a deal with Microsoft for $9.7 billion, and IREN's going to be providing AI computing power. And so now Microsoft is their biggest customer, and so this is going to be providing access to their Texas-based centers. Microsoft will get access to that, and they're especially built for AI workloads. The deal also includes a 20% prepayment, so they got a lot of that cash up front. And then, of course, the other winner in this deal is Dell, because IREN has agreed to buy the necessary chips to be able to deliver on this deal from Dell for $5.8 billion. So everyone is a winner in this deal.
Does it feel a little bit like 2000?
No, because again, these companies have real earnings, real cash flows.
Real
the
businesses.
stuff I was selling back in 98, 99, nothing. It was
eyeballs.
Yes,
That's what they're counting on.
they were potential eyeballs. So this is different, but these circular deals are to me, they're concerning. And Bloomberg News had a piece out maybe a week ago with a tremendous graphic that just shows how these deals work, because I've lost track.
It's arrows pointing to one another. It's like concentric circles gone amok.
And it seems like the circle is broadening too, like a little bit more bigger each day with new companies involved.
So all it takes is for one company to potentially stumble or not spend as much, and does it all unravel?
Who we don't know a lot about, since they're in the middle of everything, it seems like, or they're associated with everything. That's kind of where I think some risk may be. But again, if you just look at the NASDAQ issue, the market's not too concerned. Christina Kino, thank you so much for joining us. Christina Kino, managing editor for Markets Live for Bloomberg News. For more conversations like this, subscribe to our Stock Movers Reports. Listen for 5-minute audio reports on the biggest winners and losers in the stock market. Subscribe to Stock Movers on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. Saw the Bruce Springsteen movie this weekend.
Oh, and as a New Jersey guy, you approve?
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I saw it in Monmouth County, about 15 minutes to where the boss lives. So we were with his peeps. But as a big fan of his, I thought
the crowd
it was great.
roared with its approval?
Yeah, it was good. And so it worked out great. So it's a good piece of work. This is Bloomberg. Losers in the stock market.
Fed's top names are on Bloomberg Radio. Fed Governor Stephen Myron.
So I think that the Fed is too restrictive, and neutral is quite a ways below where current policy is.
Richmond Fed President Thomas Barkin.
We are very much focused on trying to land the plane here and balancing inflation, unemployment.
Fed Governor Christopher Waller.
You don't want to make a mistake, so the way to avoid that is to go cautiously or carefully.
For the latest headlines from the Fed, listen on Bloomberg Radio or anytime on the Bloomberg Talks podcast.
Holiday PSA from DSW. This is a reminder that shoes are a gift, literally. So unwrap something good, like boots that inspire your next big adventure, or cozy slippers that give you an excuse to stay in, or sneakers that feel like pure joy. Because shoes aren't just shoes, they're exactly what you wanted. Let us surprise you, so you can surprise them. Find shoes that get you, and everyone on your list, at prices that get your budget. At DSW stores or DSW.com.
Join Bloomberg in New York or via live stream on November 13th for Building a Future-Ready Business. This event will examine how companies are integrating technology, trust, and transformation into their operating models to create competitive advantages. By joining us, you'll hear from successful executives who are at the forefront of building a future-ready enterprise in the age of AI. This event is proudly sponsored by Kyndryl. Register at BloombergLive.com/future-ready.
You took the first step and quit smoking, but even former smokers may still be at risk for lung cancer. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know about a new low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early. It takes only 60 seconds and could save your life. You took the first step, now take the next. Visit SaveByTheScan.org for a simple quiz to see if you're eligible and talk to your doctor about screening. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, a conversation with Bob Michael of J.P. Morgan Asset Management.
Last week, it was no surprise that they were going to cut by 25 basis points. The dissents were a bit more hawkish than the market expected. Everyone knew that Stephen Myron would be a dovish dissent for 50 basis points, maybe even 75. And we thought one or two others might pile on. But actually, Schmid went the other way. And that got the market to reassess. And then we heard Powell's rather clumsy press conference where he tried to encompass both tail risk into what was actually a pretty clean consensus. To us, it feels as though they will be cutting again in December. We don't see a pickup in economic activity between now and the December meeting. Actually, the other headwind that's formed is the federal shutdown. So got a lot of federal workers out there who aren't collecting paychecks. I wouldn't exactly call that a tailwind to the economy.
Talk to us about demand right now for fixed income, and where is it coming from? Because I think there's a decent amount coming from outside the U.S., a lot of foreign interest.
There's demand coming from everywhere. There's a sense that investors over the years are underallocated to fixed income. I get pulled into 1 or 2 meetings a day to talk to some form of client, institutional, on the retail side. They want to know where to go in the bond market. They have too much cash. The first thing I do is congratulate them. Great call.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Institutional on the retail.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, see if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. Well, a renewed advance in equities have put the S&P 500 close to its all-time highs. Let's get right to it right now. It's little change, but at 6,839. The Dow, that's now down about 0.5%, 267 points at 47,295. And the NASDAQ, that's up about 0.4%, 114 points at 23,839. To the yield space, a 2-year 3.59%, that's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.09%, and that's up one basis point. Investors gearing up for earnings too. Palantir after the close, its stock has surged about 385% over the past year. That's all over that AI optimism. Back to more deal making. Microsoft, it signed an approximately $9.7 billion deal to purchase AI cloud capacity from Iron. It's becoming the Australian company's largest customer. Iron shares up about 15%. And shares of Eaton Corp, they're slipping. They were slipping. Now they're little changed. That's after agreeing to buy the Boyd thermal business of Boyd Corp. That's from Goldman Sachs for about $9.5 billion. And shares of New Gold, they're up about 2%. That's after agreeing to be acquired by Kerr Mining. That's for about $7 billion. It's an all-stock deal. If we look at Kerr Mining, their shares are down about 9%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Scarlett and Paul.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa Mateo, with our Bloomberg Business Flash. This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney and Scarlett Fu on this Monday morning. Its stock has surged about. We want to welcome our next guest, David Kudla. David is with Main State Capital Management. He is the CEO, Chief Investment Strategist, and founder of the firm, and joins us from Troy, Michigan. David, good to speak with you. It is a Monday, so there is M&A this morning with, of course, the news that Kenvue is being bought out. And then we also have a lot of AI headlines. Once again, the $38 billion deal from Amazon with OpenAI. So the corporate news suggests a lot of bullishness, but we don't have any actual economic data, and we're kind of operating in a little bit of a vacuum here. What is your sense of how things are right now?
About 9%.
Good morning, Scarlett. Yeah, it's, we're seeing really this bifurcated economy. AI is driving the economy higher, lifting GDP because of all these deals that are being done. The hope for AI, which is going to become a reality. It's a matter of energy and the infrastructure and incredible amount of CapEx investment into the sector. And then we have, as the ISM data pointed to today, the ISM Manufacturing Index in contraction territory, which is that lower leg of the K-shaped economy. So we have elements of the economy that are almost recessionary, but we have AI that has so much promise and is creating so much investment and driving the economy forward, at least in that sector.
David, we're kind of about 60% of the way through earnings season here in terms of the S&P 500 companies reporting. Numbers seem pretty good. I've got an EPS growth rate around 11%. Is that enough to support these valuation levels, do you believe?
Good morning, Paul. Yeah, I think that what's been amazing about earnings, if we go back to second quarter, on June 30th, there was a 4.9% consensus estimate on earnings. We ended up getting better than 10% earnings growth. And we came into third quarter, we were at 7.2% earnings estimates. We're back up towards double-digit earnings growth. We've had four previous quarters at double digits, 10% or better, which is fantastic. So it's not just that earnings are strong, but we're beating expectations. So I think that's very positive for the market because, we trade on a lot of things in the near term for stocks. But over the long term, it's about earnings, and earnings are very strong and are continuing to come in and beat. So we think that's, at least in that sector, actually one of the strongest factors we have going for the market trade. One of the strongest fundamentals.
So I think about the Mag 7 names and how Meta sold a massive amount of bonds after its latest earnings report, which investors didn't really respond favorably to. All that spending on AI not really paying off just yet in stock investors' minds. However, bond investors went gaga over the bond sale, and now Alphabet is looking to sell $22 billion of bonds in the U.S. and in Europe. Are equity investors and bond investors looking at these Mag 7 names differently?
Yeah, they're looking at it differently in that what it means for each of them. The debt that's being offered is being received well in the bond world, but for equity investors, the concern is how much of this capex can be met out of free cash flow, and that's where the concern is, and why they're issuing debt for these massive outlays, as much as $700 billion next year in 2026 for AI infrastructure build out. And there are those, you've talked about a little bit today on the show, the comparisons to the .com era, a lot different. The hyperscalers we're talking about are rock solid companies with wide moats, strong balance sheets, compared to Pets.com and the types of companies that were being valued based on a number of clicks and things like that, I think as Paul was referring to back in the .com era. So it's really different in that respect because of the quality of companies that we're talking about. But the amount of investment and capex expenditure is just massive. The debt that's being offered is being received well.
The one thing we want to talk to you, David, before you go, because we don't talk to too much, is gold. That's had an incredible run here. How do you position gold and some of these precious metals for your clients?
Yeah, we're tactical asset allocators, Paul, as you know, at Mainstay Capital Management. So we're go anywhere. We're not just the traditional stocks, bonds, and cash. And so certainly when precious metals, we have an opportunity like this with gold and silver, what we're calling the debasement trade that we think is just getting underway as fiat currencies come into question around the world, including the U.S. dollar. We've seen what's happened with central bank buying, retail buyers, institutional buyers, and we think there's a long runway for both gold and silver. So we have one of our largest allocations ever into gold, silver, and the miners. And what that does for us, it's not only non-correlated with our stock and bond positions, it's negatively correlated with stocks. So we're getting a great diversification benefit in our clients' portfolios while we're getting exceptional total returns. Today the NASDAQ, gold and silver all up about the same, but certainly a day like Thursday, we had a sea of red for stocks, and gold, silver, and the miners did very well.
All right, good stuff. David, really appreciate your joining us. David Kudla is founder, CEO, and chief investment strategist at Mainstay Capital Management. And we talked about the M&A a little bit here. Kimberly-Clark buying Kenvue in a cash and stock deal worth about $40 billion. You include debt in there, the enterprise value blows up to $48.7 billion. Diana Gomez is senior equity research analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence and has been covering this deal. Diana, what's your first take on it?
And we think there's a long runway.
So it is surprising in many ways from the perspective of Kimberly-Clark, I must confess. It shows that Kenvue really has a lot of work to do to turn around the business since it split from J&J about 2 years ago. And the third quarter miss just added up to a pile of disappointing results.
Diana, I'm looking at the Kimberly-Clark Clark stock trading down 11, 12% here. What's that telling you? Are they overpaying? Is the market skeptical about synergies? What do you read into that?
I believe more the later in terms of the synergies. It is quite a steep climb. Obviously, there's a ton of low-hanging fruit, let's say, in terms of efficiencies that can be gained, in terms of plugging the great, iconic, well-known, trusted brands from Kenvue into Kenvue's system that is running at a more efficient level at the moment, but it will. There is skepticism there because we are talking about revenue synergies as well as cost synergies, and this will be quite a complex new company. At the point when Kimberly-Clark was just simplifying, as they were, they are aiming to close the transaction on their international business that includes.
I'm looking at the Kimberly
segments like tissue by mid-2026, and now this merger expected to close around the same time just seems to complicate the picture a little bit.
Oh yeah, that does sound
the Tylenol is quite and we know how Kenvue has been dealing with some crises of in the last month with Tylenol, and then with talk lawsuits outside the U.S. as well.
So I'm glad you went there. The Tylenol situation, the Trump administration has been attacking Tylenol overall. Do you think that's something that might complicate this deal? Could regulators step in and hold things up or raise questions that will just drag things out?
Because we are talking about quite different questions, I would say, but great questions. So in terms of Tylenol, the legal risk is there. Kenvue was already fighting in the courts some lawsuits, but we now have a Texas state lawsuit on top of it. The Kimberly-Clark's price, when we look in terms of, for instance, an EBIT to enterprise value multiple, and I'm taking 2025, sorry, that they will report. So that will come at about 14 times, whereas historical transactions in the consumer health space were in the range of 16 to 20 times. So 14 times comes below that. So really reflecting not only the struggles of Kenvue, where their organic growth is still declining, but also that liability risk with lawsuits that are ongoing, and new lawsuits that can be added as well. In terms of the, say, antitrust competition, regulatory approval, as I see it, they don't really overlap directly, but it really depends on a country, region by region basis, because we know the U.S. stance can be very different from the European Commission one.
Diana, should we expect more consolidation in the consumer product space, do you think?
For instance. Yes, so that's a team that I've been watching very closely. Obviously, we had other large pharma groups with significant consumer health businesses, so we are talking not only over-the-counter medicines, but also the more personal care that deals with wellness. Sanofi decided to sell it to private equity, so at least for the next few years, that is that. Bayer is still considering, well, not considering, as management puts it, but Bayer still has their consumer health business, and they could be looking into either listing it or further consolidation within the current players.
Diana, thank you so much. Diana Gomez is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Equity Research Analyst on this Kimberly-Clark deal to buy Kenvue for $40 billion. And Paul, in doing so, Kimberly-Clark would become the second biggest health and wellness company after P&G.
Okay, yep, that's big. And yeah, we're gonna reach out to Jennifer Rhee. She does all the antitrust stuff for Bloomberg Intelligence. Get her thoughts on this deal.
And the legal overhang here from lawsuits related to Tylenol, that Kimberly-Clark absorbs all of that.
Tylenol is my wonder drug. It solves everything for me.
Just bring up Paul as a witness.
Yes, there you go. All right, S&P 500 down 16 points. This is Bloomberg.
CBS News Brief. 42 million Americans are scrambling to pay for food after SNAP benefits ran out. 2 federal judges have ordered the administration to come up with the money. CBS's Caitlin Huey-Burns.
There is a contingency fund that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has. It's about $5 billion in that fund. The administration has argued that that is reserved for emergencies like natural disasters.
President Trump's defending his deployment of federal troops to Democratic-run cities like Chicago and Portland. He tells CBS's 60 Minutes.
You have to get the people out. You know, you have to look at the people. Many of them are murderers. Many of them are people that were thrown out of their countries because they were, criminals.
Still no arrests in an explosion in a medical school building at Harvard. CBS's Samantha Cheney.
Police say the explosion was intentional and released photos showing 2 men who they say may be responsible.
Officials tell CBS News fireworks were placed in a wooden lockbox. CBS News Brief. I'm Deborah Rodriguez.
Paul as a witness.
Yes.
There's nothing worse than receiving a notice from the IRS stating you owe money. You need to listen. The IRS is preparing to send out millions of notices to individuals and business owners. Don't take on the IRS alone. SMIB Management, located in San Diego, specializes in IRS cases. Whether it's money owed, an audit, wage garnishment, or bank levy, they represent you. Visit SMIBmanagement.com. Don't let an IRS notice stop your life. Visit SMIBmanagement.com today.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Amazon's cloud unit has signed a major $38 billion deal to supply OpenAI with computing power, including access to hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA graphics processing units as part of a 7-year deal. Merger to tell you about as well, the owner of Kleenex and Huggies, Kimberly-Clark, has agreed to buy the struggling Tylenol maker Kenvue in a deal worth about $40 billion. More complaints about Tesla doors not opening when they should. New complaints filed with the nation's auto safety regulator investigating whether certain Tesla door handles are defective. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration mentions the additional complaints in a letter to Tesla about the investigation. It was started in the middle of last month. And T-Mobile is teaming up with Capital One to issue its first credit card. It's a Visa without an annual fee. It gives 2% T-Mobile rewards on purchases. Also, $5 off T-Mobile bills each month if you auto pay using the card. Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. Edition podcast, we discussed what President Trump had to say about the government shutdown in his 60 Minutes interview with Terry Haynes, the founder of Pangea Policy.
I don't think we heard anything new, but I think what we heard was more transparent and expressed more plainly than the kind of the fog of negotiation, the fog of war that we've heard before. What this is Trump saying essentially, of course, reiterating the Trump and Republican position that they're not going to negotiate the health care extension over holding the government, as they would put it, hostage. But what Trump is saying very plainly is, look, you can actually have a victory, and I'm interested in having you have one. You end the government shutdown, and I'll engage in negotiations with you to actually to make things better, faster, cheaper.
How do you see that playing out, though, Terry? Because it's been more than a month now, and the Democrats have held pretty firm on their position that they want to see an extension of those expiring subsidies for affordable health care before they'll agree to vote to reopen the government.
Well, I see it a couple of ways. One is that we've been saying this since before the shutdown started. I see it a couple of ways. One is that this is not a substantive position over health care, but until about 2 weeks before the shutdown, it was not clear what grounds the Democrats might use in order to shut the government down, and they eventually picked health care because they thought it was a good issue for them.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. Edition podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Shut down, and I'll engage in negotiations.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Well, we've got a mixed look on Wall Street, but still on records watch, so let's get right to it. We'll start with the S&P 500. It's little change, but at 6,837. We have the Dow down 0.6%, 327 points at 47,236. And the NASDAQ, that's up about 0.3%, 93 points at 23,818. In the yield space, we have the 2-year, 3.59%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.10%, and that's up about 2 basis points. To commodities, we have COMEX gold up about 0.7% at $4,027 an ounce. Over to Brent crude down 0.2% at $64 a barrel. WTI crude $60 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, that's strengthening by about 0.1%. In company news, Berkshire Hathaway's cash pile getting bigger, soaring to a fresh record $381.7 billion last quarter, while operating earnings surged about 34%. And Tesla's, those faulty door handles, they are back in the spotlight. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, they say they've received more consumer complaints about them after launching that investigation back in mid-September. And finally, sources saying Alphabet looking to raise about $15 billion. That's from a dollar bond sale. The deal being offered in as many as 8 parts with maturities ranging from 3 to 50 years. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Scarlett and Paul.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City, streaming live on YouTube as well. As Lisa was just reporting, Berkshire Hathaway reported really strong earnings. And they also reported that they have about $382 billion of cash on the balance sheet, which begs the question, as it does every quarter, as it has for years, what do you do with all that money? Matthew Palazzola, senior analyst, property and casualty insurance from Bloomberg Intelligence, joins us here in our studio. I'll tell you what you do. You buy back stock and you put a 3% dividend yield on. You give that cash back to shareholders. That falls on deaf ears at Berkshire Hathaway, right?
I think so. I mean, look, certainly a good problem to have. And I would quibble a little bit, so that 382 includes 20-ish billion in treasuries that didn't settle. So it's probably 360 billion. Just
still a lot.
Still a lot. No, I would say the interesting thing is the stock has underperformed the market by like 30% since Buffett announced that he was stepping down in May, and they haven't bought back any stock over that entire period.
Yeah, does that?
I turn my mic on. I say why?
Yeah. So Buffett used to have a rule when the stock was above 1.2 times price to book, they wouldn't buy it back. They kind of kicked that out, and they said we're just going to buy it back whenever we see intrinsic value below. So, I don't, to me, it begs the question. I mean, maybe he sees the stock as kind of fully valued, even down, year to date.
Even with the lagging performance as well. So does that change when Greg Abel, the handpicked successor to Warren Buffett, takes the reins officially at the end of the year?
Look, certainly, Scarlett, he walks a fine line between putting some sort of stamp on the company, maybe over time, and then kind of respecting the ethos of Berkshire and how they've operated. I would hope something happens. I mean, they did a $10 billion deal in the fourth quarter. They bought the OxyChem business from Occidental. They just don't have things that can move the needle very much. Even in the quarter, their net stock buys and sells were a negative $6 billion. So they were negative on other equities as well.
Yeah, they were net seller stocks for a 12th straight quarter, and that cash and equivalents was at a record high at the end of September. Is that a signal that they're waiting for the market to tank, that they see a correction, maybe not tank, that might be too strong. They see a correction or consolidation in the near term and are ready for it?
They're always ready for it. Buffett has always said we're not looking to time the market. We're just looking for good companies. He's also been, when I talk to people, the thought is he just hoarding money for Greg Abel and kind of setting the company up and just handing it over? He's said he's not doing that. So, unfortunately, they don't talk to investors. So we can't really pick his brain besides at the annual meeting, so we don't exactly know what's going on there. I think he's just extra conservative in his old age, I guess.
All right, and here's my cynical Wall Street perspective. When Mr. Buffet passes, 3% dividend yield, massive stock buyback. Do you think that's a scenario?
I think
there were net seller stocks for 12
dividend yield, hopefully, some sort of dividend, maybe special dividends. The buyback, I think, will also kind of weigh on what Abel sees the intrinsic value. So I would say probably, hopefully dividend, I would say maybe more steady buyback. There's also, they can't buy back a ton of shares on volume because there's rules on how much they can buy back and how active they can be in the market, so that limits them a little bit.
That's plan B. We gotta,
when I talk
don't you have to split the stock like a bajillion to one?
Well, they have the A shares and the B shares, but there's I don't have all the exact rules, but they've talked about we can only buy back so much at a time. They bought back none, so I think a steady buyback plus some returns of capital in forms of I would hope special dividends. Maybe they don't want to be beholden to a regular quarterly dividend.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so that's something we'll watch for when that eventually happens. In the meantime, how are the businesses of Berkshire Hathaway performing, especially insurance?
Yeah, so all good in the quarter. The insurance business made much more money than the year ago, but that was because they had a bunch of large losses in the year ago. They also had this favorable reserve development, which means they write business and those losses come in better or worse than they expect over time. And those losses were coming in better than they expected. So it's a good thing, but it's not a super high quality source of earnings beat. So the insurance business performed well on those two things, which aren't super high quality in my opinion. The underlying business in the insurance doing well. The problem is it's hard for it to get much better next year. The underwriting side, the prices in that are going down. So I think it's tough to see the insurance underwriting doing better next year. It's also tough to see the investments doing better next year. And we're talking about really just the fixed income investments. So like the equities, who knows what happens. But in terms of the interest income, we saw that decline in the quarter as well.
The business fundamentals of the underlying businesses, did they move the stock historically?
Not really.
No.
Yeah.
So
it's tough.
So Scarlett asked the one fundamental question. That's enough. Let's get back to the main point of the story here.
It's also my job too.
Is there an activist investor who's ever mentioned one word about this company?
So historically, there have been investors very vocal about it. I don't have names, but no one's ever been able to move the needle. Buffett's always the majority shareholder, so there's really been no one who's ever been forcing them to do anything. And so why would they even listen?
And can you do that with a company that has an A-class share and B-class share?
What is his voting control? I haven't done the math.
I don't off the top of my head. I thought it was something like 60% of the shares, something like that. And other insiders will hold more, so there's almost no way of wresting control from him. The A shares and the B shares, they did. So the A shares are several $100,000, and then they instituted the B shares, and they're kind of pegged to each other, so you couldn't buy up the B shares and kind of take control either.
They've come up with all kinds of rules to make sure that all the things you just proposed can't happen.
I know. I'm not the first one.
He's not a dumb guy, Buffett.
Yeah, exactly right. It's been an extraordinary run. Is there a sense that the law of large numbers over the last several years, if not the last decade, is kind of caught up to this name?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they bought a company for $12 billion, Allegheny, and it barely moves the needle. They bought this OxyChem for $10 billion, barely moves the needle. They bought like $20 billion of Chevron stock 2 years ago. It didn't even come up at the annual meeting. People didn't even ask about it. I was sitting there, I couldn't believe. I said, no one's going to ask about this. So there's just things that are tough for them to move the needle from having so much money. They're making those investments in Japan, which I think are interesting. So they invest in the trading houses in Japan. It's hard for me to know a ton about those businesses. Some of them are like mini Berkshires. Maybe this is stuff that they kind of do in the future. Also, the energy business. Greg Abel's an energy guy. Aon is an insurance broker. They talked about last week this huge opportunity with the hyperscalers needing risk transfer services and other things. So those are things that fit right into Berkshire's wheelhouse, right? The risk transfer and the energy businesses. So those are opportunities for them in the future.
Doesn't sound like stuff that'll move the needle in the
way that you're thinking, though, Paul.
Yeah, I don't know. I see the Gates Foundation, the fifth largest shareholder of the B shares.
They give them, that's through donations.
Yes. Yep. Interesting. So, but we'll see how it goes. But it's a intriguing story, as it is every single quarter. Matthew Palazzolo, senior analyst, covers the insurance agencies and ostensibly Warren Buffett for Bloomberg Intelligence. We appreciate getting a few minutes of his time. Berkshire Hathaway. This is Bloomberg.
A government shutdown grips Washington.
No end in sight, no off-ramps visible either. The impact is starting to spread beyond the Beltway.
It is the second longest U.S. shutdown in history.
And Bloomberg Radio brings you complete coverage from D.C.
Everyone is going to feel the pinch if we cannot get this government back.
Somebody needs to show good faith. Somebody needs to be the adult in the room.
Both sides are looking at the polling data, and both sides are saying we're good.
For the latest headlines on the government shutdown and the effect on the markets, stay with Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Pfizer is now accusing Novo Nordisk of trying to stifle competition in the weight loss market by attempting to acquire obesity startup Metsera. And Pfizer has filed a lawsuit against Novo and Metsera on antitrust grounds. Some weakness for stocks today, but some strength in tech. Amazon's cloud unit has signed a $38 billion deal to supply OpenAI with computing power. And the deal includes access to hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA graphics processing units as part of a 7-year deal. These economic headlines crossing, U.S. October ISM Manufacturing Index falls to a lower level than expected. Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago President Austin Goolsbee says he wants to see more data before deciding on interest rates, but warns he's more concerned about inflation now than the labor market. And the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has received more complaints about those Tesla door handles that don't necessarily open when they're supposed to. They initiated a probe into the issue earlier. Denise Pellegrino, Bloomberg Radio.
Hey player, the all-new Hamul Casino Resort is all yours. The hotel tower with some seriously luxurious suites. The super secret speakeasy. Hey, could you make that too? The indulgent spa retreat. And the epic rooftop pool in Cabanas. It's all for you at the all-new Hamul Casino Resort, the player's place. Book your experience at HamulCasino.com.
Up to the minute market headlines.
The stock story of the day is NVIDIA.
The trend line is good for jobless claims.
Along with in-depth research on more than 2,000 global companies.
Some of these big tech names, are these entry points?
What does renewables investment look like in the U.S.?
The Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast with Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney.
How do you broaden out the AI play?
Bloomberg Intelligence. Listen live weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app or on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Caroline Hyde.
And I'm Ed Ludlow. Join us for Bloomberg Tech, a daily podcast focusing exclusively on technology, innovation, and the future of business.
We bring you the latest headlines from Silicon Valley and conversations with tech's biggest decision makers.
You have to have a pro-innovation mindset.
We were partnered with OpenAI.
We've all experienced this incredible revolution.
Bloomberg Tech.
Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app and anywhere you get your podcasts.
Bloomberg Podcasts. Context changes everything.
The next generation of Wall Street Week is here.
What could be the story of the century.
Bloomberg's David Weston brings you stories of capitalism.
The train station felt like the right kind of project.
Teaching kids, above all else, is a mission.
The hardest business to change is one that's succeeded for a long time.
The new Wall Street Week.
More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
Fridays at 6 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Television and Radio. And anywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City, streaming live on YouTube as well. Here's from Bloomberg Intelligence as it relates to this Novo Nordisk Metsera obesity drug deal that was announced last week. These PI folks do not pull any punches. Novo Nordisk's potential acquisition of Metsera is perplexing and even suggests a lack of confidence in its in-house obesity pipeline. given the significant overlap portfolio. Ouch. Sam Fazeli, he joins us. He's one of the cabal over there in London covering all the healthcare stuff. It's his fault that we have to deal with healthcare so much. So it's interesting. In your world, Sam, obesity drugs have become such a huge issue for your companies and for the market caps. And now we've got kind of a bidding war, I think, with Pfizer and Novo Nordisk and Metsera. What's the latest there?
And Paul, the last time I saw a bidding war in this sector was when?
Oh boy, I don't know.
I don't remember. Yep. I mean, there are examples, etc., right? It's just so, we've gone from 0 to 100 miles an hour with this sector at the minute. There was 3-4 years of doldrums and hardly any fundraisings, and then suddenly lots of M&A, and then two companies want the same company, which is interesting. So, look at what we're seeing here is something that we just sat around thinking about this. What is the motivation for Novo Nordisk to get involved here? And that was obviously last week, and since then, over Friday and then today, Pfizer filed 2 lawsuits. Remember, Pfizer was the one who went after Metsera first because their own obesity pipeline didn't quite pan out, so they thought, let's do what pharma companies do, go buy biotech, right, to backfill that. And we think Metsera's assets are good, they're competitive, they have possibility of pushing it to once a month as opposed to once a week dosing. So here you are, Pfizer gaining a potential foothold. What happens? One of the 2 big incumbents also steps in, Novo Nordisk. So we still don't understand how this fits together. I'm just talking to my colleague Jennifer Rhee, who's our antitrust lawyer, senior analyst, and she says she's looked at the arguments that Pfizer are making. They're making very solid arguments. This is the odd part. I'm going to stop there and hand it over back to you. The odd part is that if I was Metsera, I had this deal in hand from Pfizer. Here comes Novo Nordisk with something around the 20% higher number. I mean, it varies depending on what part of it you look at. With meaningful antitrust risk, Pfizer's not sued them. Why would I, as Metsera, take a 20%? If it was double, I get it, right? Here, you're sitting here risking the future of this, hanging around for a year as these guys fight each other and get to the FTC, and maybe even the president would get involved, right? This is I'm still perplexed.
Go with the clear-cut bid, which doesn't complicate things, is what you're saying, Sam. The thing with Novo's bid, the very aggressive bid coming in, is that it's offered to pay Metsera shareholders up front when the deal is signed, but before the deal is closed. And I guess this is not what's typical, right? So as a result, if you add it all up, its bid is higher than Pfizer's. Is what Novo Nordisk proposing legal? Is it illegal? Or is it just something that's not been done?
Okay, so that's where my brain stops functioning, and Jennifer Rhee's and Holly Froom's brains function much better, right? I think all of these things, they've taken legal advice, are legal. What is weird is that in the press release, they say, this is the reason we're going with this structure, because we want to, I can't remember the exact words, please don't people shout at me if I get the exact words right, but essentially saying, this is how we avoid antitrust issues. But by stating that, aren't you saying that there's reason for antitrust issues, which of course we can all have? So again, continued perplexation. That's a word.
Sam, what's next in the world of obesity drugs coming out of the pipeline here? What should investors be looking towards?
The thing with Novo,
well, we got Obesity Week this week. Mike Shaw, my colleague, I think it is this week. Yeah, I think he's going to it, and he's going to be looking at data that's coming out, and some of the data would be from Metsera. There are, these things are never done, right? So you then extend dosing, or you extend the length of time you follow patients, and suddenly your efficacy drops off, or your efficacy gets better, and your side effect profile needs to be cleared out and figured out. So there are things that Metsera needs to still show, but in any case, I'm pretty sure these companies have all seen whatever data Metsera is going to be putting out in the next week or 2 or 3 or 4 in the data room when they go to these deals. Apparently, Novo was there at the beginning. So was apparently Bristol Myers, according to, I think, Wall Street Journal, but Pfizer won out.
So, Sam, before we let you go, I saw a headline that I thought was interesting, and I just want to get your take very quickly. The top FDA drug regulator is leaving his office over personal conduct misconduct. George Tidmarsh, sued by a pharmaceutical company which accused him of a personal vendetta against the chairman. This sounds like it's a political appointment, but does this slow down the approval of new drugs?
I think it is this week, yeah. Hopefully not. Those divisions are occupied by many excellent people where the system functions. A little bit like government, you have your chief politicians, and then there's the entire group that actually makes things happen. Civil servants, we call them here in the UK. So I think that doesn't really make much of a difference. The issue is that we've got this was flagged when it happened. It just looked wrong when CEDAR, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, went against this particular drug, and everybody knew what the history was. And of course, this particular thing has come home to roost for George Tidmarsh.
All right, Sam, thanks so much for joining us. Always appreciate seeing you, chatting with you. We have no idea where in Europe you are right now because I can tell it's not London. Sam Fazeli, Director of Research for Global Industries and Senior Pharmaceuticals Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. I mean, I get the Baltimore office. He gets Vienna.
I just see New York, so I don't even go anywhere.
All right.
How about that? You're better off than I am.
It's just such a scam. For our listeners in the U.S., a reminder, you can listen to us via satellite radio on Sirius XM Channel 121. Access the world's only global audio business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg Radio on Sirius XM Channel 121 is presented by Oracle.
Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney.
How do you think the Fed is looking at tariffs, the uncertainty of tariffs?
Let's take a look at the sectors and how they performed.
A lot of investors getting whipsawed every day by news events.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Could we see a market disruption, a market event?
Are people just too exuberant out there?
You see some so-called low-quality stocks driving this short-term rally.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
Good Monday morning. This is Bloomberg Intelligence, streaming live on YouTube. We are live from our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio here in Midtown Manhattan. Paul Sweeney and Scarlett Fu here with you. We have a packed second hour of Bloomberg Intelligence for you. We're going to kick things off with David Gura. He is our Big Take host, podcast host, and he's on the ground in Rio de Janeiro to preview COP30 taking place in Brazil. Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence's senior policy analyst, will join us for the latest on the government shutdown. I'm not sure there's a whole lot going on, and that's kind of the problem, but Nathan will get us up to date on everything. And then Randall Williams will be joining us. He's the Bloomberg Business of Sports reporter on the World Series, which, let's take a look, included in dramatic fashion on Sunday morning, and on the top business sports stories. And then Phil Orlando, the chief equity market strategist and head of client portfolio management at Federated Hermes, will talk to us about these markets with the S&P and the NASDAQ moving higher this Monday morning. First, though, we go now to Charlie Pellet for our Bloomberg Business Flash. Charlie.
Well, I thank you very much, Scarlett Fu, and here's what's going on. We've got the Dow lower, the S&P, NASDAQ. They are both advancing right now, with the S&P higher, little changed, up just 5 points right now, up just about 0.1%. The Dow, though, down 201 points. That is a drop of 0.4%. While NASDAQ is up 98 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain right now of 0.4%. Bottom line here, Wall Street's broader stock market is struggling to make headway. Tech shares, though, keep climbing as Amazon's $38 billion deal with OpenAI adds fuel to the artificial intelligence trade. We've got the 10-year currently yielding 4.10% with a 2-year 3.59%. Gold is up $8 the ounce, holding above 4,000 at 4,011. Little change there. West Texas Intermediate crude up 11 cents a barrel, 61.09, up 0.2%. Bitcoin now with a $105,000 handle. Bitcoin lower by 4%. So again, recapping here, we've got the S&P 500 index higher, little change now, up just about 0.1%. Fed Governor Stephen Miron is saying more about his dissent from last week's decision to cut rates another quarter point. The newest Fed governor, now on leave from his role as White House economic advisor, voted for an even bigger 0.5% move.
I think that the Fed is too restrictive. I think that neutral is quite a ways below where current policy is. And given my rather more sanguine outlook on inflation than some of the other members of the committee, I don't see a reason for keeping policy as restrictive for a long period of time as we are. The longer you keep policy restrictive, the more you run the risk that monetary policy itself causes a downturn in the economy.
And Governor Stephen Myron says he does not think the Fed needs to move faster than a series of 50 basis point cuts, and if his forecast plays out, he could dissent again for a 50 basis point move at next month's Fed meeting. By the way, you can watch the full conversation on YouTube on the Bloomberg podcast channel. Amazon Web Services signing that $38 billion deal to supply OpenAI with computing power, providing access to hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA graphics processing units. Amazon shares, they are trading higher now by 4.5%. NVIDIA up by another 2.6%. Recapping, S&P up 4, little changed, up under 0.1%. And for on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Let's take a look at some of the stocks on the move today. I'm Paul Sweeney alongside Scarlett Fu, and we're joined by Bloomberg's Nora Melinda. Nora, what are you looking at today?
Well, there was a lot to dig into this morning as I was kind of sifting through some of these stocks. I've got eyes on Kimberly-Clark. This is ticker KMB. Really in focus here alongside Kenvue, which is ticker KVUE. We've got shares of Kimberly-Clark plunging as the worst performing stock in the S&P 500. Its worst day in 25 years. Elevated trading volume that we're seeing here. This is the biggest drop since March 7th, 2000. And this is after the company agreed to buy Kenvue for roughly $40 billion. This will value Kenvue at $48.7 billion on an enterprise basis here. And it's really just, you're seeing the street just trying to digest this this deal here and thinking about the implications here for Kimberly-Clark. If you look at shares of Kenvue, they are rising, though, among the best performing stocks in the S&P 500. But this combination should create a company worth about $32 billion in revenue, and it'll allow it to surpass Unilever to become the second biggest seller of health and wellness products following Procter & Gamble there.
Yeah, pretty big giant in the consumer goods space. Let's talk about the $5 trillion company, NVIDIA.
NVIDIA, of course, we can't stop talking about that one. And this is a deal between, we're looking at Amazon and NVIDIA right now. Of course, we know Amazon's cloud unit signed a $38 billion deal to supply a slice of OpenAI's demand for computing power. So we did see shares of Amazon rising up, extending their record high streak that we're seeing today, up as much as 5.9%. Now, this, of course, OpenAI will pay AWS for access to hundreds of thousands of NVIDIA GPUs as part of a 7-year deal. This was announced between the two companies today. So you really are seeing Wall Street investors clearly celebrating this collaboration that we're seeing between some of these major powerhouses here.
All right, one more for us.
One more, another deal. We can't stop talking about deals on this Monday. Shares of Microsoft in focus. This is MSFT. And alongside Iron, this is IREN, the ticker there. Iron is an Australia-based renewable energy company. They essentially manage next-gen data centers that are powered by renewable energy. And this is all optimized for Bitcoin mining, services, and other power-dense compute. But you saw Microsoft signing a deal to buy this company for about $9.7 billion. This is a 5-year agreement, and this will give Microsoft access to NVIDIA systems in Texas, and it includes a 20% prepayment here. So lots of NVIDIA action clearly going on today in the market, and a lot of deals happening on this Monday.
All right, good stuff. Thank you so much, Bloomberg's Nora Melinda. She is our markets correspondent here for Bloomberg Television. And for more conversations like this, be sure to subscribe to our Stock Movers Reports. Listen for 5-minute audio reports on the biggest winners and losers in the stock market. You can subscribe to Stock Movers on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. Paul, did you know that COP30 is taking place this week?
I did know that. And down in Brazil, right?
Down in Brazil, not anywhere here in North America, not in the U.S. But of course, this is a big global event for many countries outside the U.S. because we made clear that climate change is not a priority here.
That's right.
As President Trump put it to the Security Council and the General Assembly overall. Let's bring in David Gura. He is Bloomberg's Big Take podcast host, and he is also our correspondent who hits the ground whenever there's a big confab taking place around the world. And David joins us now from on the ground in Rio de Janeiro. David, kind of set the scene for us here for the COP30, the United Nations Climate Change Conference that is taking place this week.
a lot of deals happening on this Monday.
All right, good.
So it certainly fits the description that you just used, Scarlett. It is a big confab, and it's one that's going to last about 3 weeks. So we were at the beginning of it here in Rio, where the focus is really on local leaders, state-level leaders, not government, federal government leaders. That's going to come a bit later in this process. But what you have gathered here are mayors from all over the world, governors from all over the world, and the conversation centers on what they can do at that local level, that subnational level, to combat climate change. Later this week, there will be a focus on world leaders. That'll be at the Global Leaders Summit that's going to take place in Belém on the mouth of the Amazon River. We can talk a bit about the challenges of that in just a minute here. But really what this is kind of in recognition of is the fact that the terrain has really shifted here in terms of how governments deal with this issue of climate change. You alluded to what President Trump said in that speech to the UN General Assembly, really reverberating around the world and calling climate change a scam, and saying the U.S. no longer wants to have any part here in combating it in any kind of multinational way. Folks here are reckoning with that and trying to plot a path forward here, absent the involvement of the U.S. Of course, the President pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord during his first term, did again this time around. So again, the situation, the circumstances have really changed as a result, and that's shaping the conversations here. It will certainly shape the conversations over the course of these next 3 weeks, guys.
And David, Mike Bloomberg, the owner of Bloomberg LP and this radio and TV operation here, has long held the view that local leaders, particularly mayors, and being the former mayor of New York City, he knows how that works. Local leaders are really the ones that can be agents of change for a wide range of issues, including climate change. Is that a view that's held broadly around the world as you're down there in Brazil?
Just a minute here. But really what this is kind of in recognition. So it's certainly a view that has been adopted widely around the world with the help of Bloomberg Philanthropies and Mike Bloomberg, as you mentioned. You see a lot of mayors here, hundreds of mayors who've come to Rio to have conversations about what's worked in their cities, in their towns, and what might be replicated in other places. Again, that's happening at kind of the gubernatorial level as well. But as you know, Paul, when you have leaders at that level, they don't have to succumb to kind of the wins that you might at the federal level, at the national level. So again, picking up on what you just said there's a hope and an optimism that there'll be kind of continuity. They'll be able to implement changes there at the local and state level that can kind of stay in place. A report's coming out today that kind of looks at the way that states and municipalities have been able to curb carbon emissions. Again, piloting it in cities, moving it to other cities around the world, and hoping, I think, long term, that federal governments will take notice and maybe take some of the lessons learned and apply them on a large national level.
All right, fantastic context there. David Gura, he is the host of Bloomberg's Big Take podcast, also a correspondent for us. He is joining us on site from the United Nations Climate Change Conference, also known as COP30, taking place in Rio de Janeiro. David will be checking in with you in the days to come. Back here at home, Paul?
Yep.
Government shutdown continues.
Still shut down as far as I can tell.
Yeah, still shut down. Nathan Dean is our man on the ground in Washington. He's our senior policy analyst over at Bloomberg Intelligence. And Nathan, we're in November now, and it feels like, the damage is piling up. A lot of people haven't gotten paid, including the military, including essential workers, including TSA. Are there any discussions taking place? I feel like a broken record, but it needs to be asked.
Yeah, I would actually say there are chit-chats taking place. Don't call them negotiations, just call them chit-chats, because over the weekend we saw rank-and-file senators come together and say, look, maybe we should start working on things like appropriations, specifically the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. And those negotiations or those chit-chats are actually bursting into somewhat of optimism that there could be a solution by the end of this week. Now, the problem is nobody knows what that solution is. And as, these negotiations or these chit-chats continue, more pressure points continue to mount up. Talk about SNAP benefits, talk about air traffic controllers, talk about all these other things that the American populace is beginning to feel in response to this shutdown. Now, we also do have a major catalyst coming up tomorrow, and that is the Virginia, New Jersey, New York City elections. And there's a thought out there that if the Democrats win big in Virginia and New Jersey, they could just say, hey, let's cash in our chips here and say that our strategy has worked. Now let's work towards an end game. So if the government does reopen, it would be most likely an agreement to reopen the government, an agreement to have a vote on these ACA subsidies, not a deal to resolve these ACA subsidies, and then ultimately they just continue to negotiate on what it would look like for 2026. If it doesn't reopen then this week, then it most likely is going to be Thanksgiving chaos that would bring the policymakers back together, because the senators are scheduled to go on recess next week.
Yeah, Yeah, no bueno. Nathan, understandably, President Trump's attention last week was focused on international affairs as he was in Asia. He's back in the U.S. Any reason to believe that President Trump may insert himself here to try to break the logjam?
So he's trying to insert himself. He did this over the weekend through posts on social media, but not in a way that I think Republican leadership was hoping for, because President Trump was calling for an end to the filibuster. Remember, this is the tool that requires 60 votes in the Senate to get most legislation done. Now, Republican leadership doesn't want to get away with the filibuster. It's one of those scenarios where it may work for the Republicans today, but the Democrats will be in charge someday, and the Democrats could use it to their advantage. So what I think happens here is the Republicans are essentially going to say, President Trump, thank you very much, but we're not going to end the filibuster. And this solution, if it does come forward, I think will come from the rank and file senators, not leadership. And they will go to leadership and say, here you go, this is what we've agreed upon, and this is what we should vote on. You know, Democrats have been looking for President Trump to interject himself in other ways into the debate, but I just don't see it happening. President Trump right now is focused on a lot of other things.
Yeah, he is. And he doesn't seem too bothered by what's happening or not happening in Washington. What do you think of Speaker Johnson's continued strategy of keeping House Republicans out of Washington during the ongoing shutdown? I think the last time that they worked on anything was about 6 weeks ago, which is kind of mind-boggling. And I just wonder if there are long-term costs to the conference from the strategy.
Yeah, you know, Speaker Johnson's strategy of keeping the Republicans out, I think, was just really designed so that, you know, the Republican caucus wasn't giving interviews or talking to the press in an area where the American populace may not agree with them. I mean, let's look at the polling data that's come out over the weekend. You know, historically, it's always been that the independents slightly blame Republicans more than Democrats. And both sides, both Democrats and Republicans, look at the same data and they come to the conclusion they're good. I mean, that they think they're sitting pretty. And so I think Speaker Johnson's idea here of keeping the Republican caucus away is just to say, look, we've done our job. We've passed the CR that gets us through November 21st. Now it's up to the Democrats. And to a certain extent, the strategy has somewhat worked because the polling data hasn't changed all that much. But to another extent, you know, they potentially could get the blame if the polling data does change. So I don't think you're going to see a change in strategy. The only thing that would bring the Republicans back is if that Senate deal ultimately decides to just completely negate what the House has done, call it a one-year CR that puts us into the lame duck of 2026. If the Senate comes up with their own agreement, then it's going to force the Republicans back. Then they're going to have to do some work in the House.
I mean, one could argue this, you know, we're in day 32 of the shutdown. Most Americans would say, so what? You know, I still have my job. I'm still getting paid. You know, it reflects on just the value of Congress in general. We've gone 32 days, and most Americans would say, it's not affecting me that much.
Yeah, and this really plays into the director of the OMB, Russ Vought. I mean, his idea here is essentially is that if you can operate without a government or a functioning government, then why do you need so many federal workers around? But unintended consequences are coming out there. I mean, we talk about market data, we talk about air traffic controllers, but we haven't talked about things like, you know, getting visas or getting passports. And let's also remember is that a lot of the pressure point has been taken off, and these are the paychecks to the military, because President Trump has allocated funds from other areas to pay those military service members. That can only last a couple more paychecks. And so eventually those pressure points will mount, and those unintended consequences get greater and greater and greater. And as a result, the American populace, that polling data will change, and I think it would change prior to the Thanksgiving travel season.
All right, good stuff. Nathan, really appreciate your joining us. Nathan Dean on the ground there in Washington, D.C. Is this something that people talk about when they see each other in the area, or are they kind of over it?
You know, I think it's mostly over it. I mean, obviously the federal workers who are impacted, they talk about this, but anecdotally, I can tell you from the flag football fields that a lot of people just want to know when it's going to reopen.
All right, Nathan Dean telling it like it is, senior policy analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. You know, it does beg the question, certainly if we don't need Congress, do we need to pay them? Because they're not doing much of anything right now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I kind of think the people that are being affected, the military not getting paid, that's a problem.
Yeah, air traffic control,
that's a problem. But again, unfortunately, the only catalyst date I can think of is what Nathan mentioned around the Thanksgiving holidays. If you're going to have serious delays around the Thanksgiving holidays or the threat of it, that would be a catalyst.
Okay, so pandemonium first and then urgency.
Yes, unfortunately, that's the downside.
Not a good sequence of events.
No, it's not. Looking at the markets here, still kind of mixed out there. We've got the S&P up 4 points, but the Dow is down 200 points. That's about 0.4%. But the Nasdaq is up 100 points, up 0.4%. So not a lot of direction out there at the index level. 10-year Treasury yields higher by 4 basis points. We're back up to 4.12%. We were below 4% just about 10 days ago. So a move up in yields. WTI crude oil $61 a barrel. That's a little bit higher.
The Fed's top names are on Bloomberg Radio. Fed Governor Stephen Meyer.
But I think that the Fed is too restrictive, and neutral is quite a ways below where current policy is.
Richmond Fed President Thomas Barkin.
We're very much focused on trying to land the plane here and balancing inflation and unemployment.
Fed Governor Christopher Waller.
You don't want to make a mistake, so the way to avoid that is to go cautiously or carefully.
For the latest headlines from the Fed, listen on Bloomberg Radio or anytime on the Bloomberg Talks podcast.
That would be a catalyst.
Okay, so pandemonium.
Hey, player.
Yes.
The all-new Humul Casino Resort is all yours. The hotel tower with some seriously luxurious suites. The super secret speakeasy. Hey, could you make that too? The indulgent spa retreat. And the epic rooftop pool in Cabanas. It's all for you at the all-new Humul Casino Resort, the player's place. Book your experience at humulcasino.com.
On a recent edition of the Odd Lots podcast, Joe Weisenthal and Tracy Alloway speak with Austin Frerick, author of the new book, Barons, Money, Power, and the Corruption of America's Food Industry, on how Cisco became the food distributor that shapes America's menus.
How did Cisco get to be a dominant player in this particular space?
I love this origin story. John Bott, he's a different type of character compared to the other Barons in the book. I really like him. Like, he's like a model businessman where he's one of those people, comes out of Waco, Texas. His brother and dad died young, dropped out of college, leave Baylor to support his mom, worked at A&P, got transferred to the A&P in Houston. He's one of those people you see in business history that just saw things before other people. He saw two important things. Number one, the rise of frozen food. We're talking like right after World War II, and how that was going to, and then also frozen food mixed with women entering the workforce, knowing that they want to make quicker meals. So we thought, oh, people are going to eat out more. The thing to keep in mind here is our norm of eating out is a very new thing in America. Like, historically, you used to like bring a dish to something that was like a church function. Now we eat out about once a day. So he saw that thing ahead of people, and he didn't think A&P was moving fast enough. So he founded essentially a frozen berry company. But going back to this point you made, Joe, about all these different things, that's how the idea from Cisco came from, where literally some Irish oil man was opening a fancy hotel in Houston, and he was working the loading dock that night, and he saw in the day, frozen strawberry, it's frozen strawberry. I don't have a competitive advantage. What I can do is this food buyer has like 30 different vendors for all these different things. What I can do is offer him as much as possible. So the origin of Cisco was he brought 9 companies together to create it, and he realized someone's going to fill this at some point. So even though they only did business in a few states, he registered in all 50 states. So that's how Cisco was created.
That's what's on a recent edition of the Odd Lots podcast. Listen to the full episode on Apple, Spotify, the Bloomberg Business app, or anywhere you get your podcasts.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow lower, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're both higher. And this Bloomberg Business Flash is brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses, Oracle's offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitments, see if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. Right now, the S&P is moving higher by 7 points. A little changed, up 0.1%. The S&P now at 6846. We've got the Dow lower by 192 points. The industrials down 0.4%, while NASDAQ up 114, now a gain of 0.5%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares slumping by 0.7%, and our Mag 7 index up now by 1.6%. The 10-year 4.11% with the 2-year 3.60%. Gold little change, down 60 cents the ounce at $4,002. West Texas Intermediate crude 61.42 a barrel, up 0.7%. Bitcoin major move there, 106,350 on Bitcoin. It is down right now by 3.1%. Kimberly Clark is buying Kenvue in a deal worth roughly $40 billion, providing a lifeline to the struggling Tylenol maker. Kimberly-Clark says the combination will create a company with $32 billion in revenue and allow it to surpass Unilever to become the second biggest seller of health and wellness products after Procter & Gamble, but it does also saddle the Kleenex maker with potential legal concerns down the road. Kimberly-Clark now lower by 12.6%. Kenvue is up 16.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Scarlet Fu, Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. I think the tape that Charlie just mentioned is kind of a microcosm of this marketplace here. We've got a market that's trading higher a little bit, but boy, the NASDAQ is where the action is. And that's kind of what we've seen for a lot of this year. AI has kind of been the theme for not just tech, but for the broader market, it seems, as more and more use cases of AI get discussed by different types of companies in different parts of the economy. Phil Orlando joins us, Chief Equity Market Strategist and Head of Client Portfolio Management at Federated Hermes. Hey, Phil, thanks so much for joining us here. AI, it's obviously it's a real force in this U.S. economy, this global economy. There are some concerns about maybe how some of these deals may be circular in nature, maybe the dollars and cents associated with them are maybe just extraordinarily, maybe too high, and maybe the valuation surrounding AI may be too high. How do you think about just the AI as a market dynamic? Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate
First of all, Paul, thank you very much for having me back on. And those are all reasonable questions and reasonable concerns. You look at the impact that AI is having, the Mag 7 names in particular, growth and technology on the third quarter earnings season, and the numbers are phenomenal. This is the first earnings season we've had in 4 years in which analysts didn't actually cut their estimates during the third quarter. And here we are now, about 2/3 of the way through the earnings season. Revenues are up about 8 or 9% year over year. Earnings are up about 14 or 15%. And a lot of that is being driven by, how well these technology companies are doing. Now, the circular financing question is one that keeps coming up, that these companies seem to be loaning money to their customers or their clients to be able to buy more of their products and services. And how is that any different than an auto company, for example, financing the sale of automobiles, or a housing company financing the sale of their home? Maybe it's just another way to get things done. The reality is that AI is here to stay. It's a growth trend that is going to have a significant impact on the U.S. economy. And front page of the Wall Street Journal this morning talked about several of the big companies in the U.S. which are implementing white-collar layoffs for the first time in a really long time, because maybe they're thinking that AI on the come has the ability to replace some of those services at a lower unit cost.
Yeah, and that's certainly the flip side of the AI revolution, the AI story, the narrative that's driving everything. If you're a growth investor, you're loving this, right? You've got tech and communication services, 2 of the 11 sectors in the S&P, 2 of the biggest ones, leading the advance this year, up at least 25%. On the flip side, you look at the laggards, and you have consumer staples down 1.25%. And it is in that space where you have some of the deal making that's taking place. The most recent one was Kimberly-Clark buying Kenvue. Is this a deal? Is this an area that's worth looking at, Phil, in terms of actually seeing a catalyst for some bigger gains?
The reality is that it was our belief that we would see a significant increase in both M&A activity and IPO activity as a result of the Fed engaging more aggressively in a new interest reduction campaign. That despite what Jay Powell said last week, we think is going to continue through next year. We do think there's another cut coming on December 10th. We do think there's 3 more cuts coming next year. Embedded in that, a leadership change at the Federal Reserve to more dovish leadership. So we're probably looking at a 3% funds rate by the end of next year. That said, in that environment, you should see a stronger IPO environment, a stronger M&A environment. Specifically, you're looking at the Kimberly-Clark acquisition of Kenvue. Kimberly-Clark's getting hit this morning. I think they're probably taking the long view here, that if they've got the ability to buy a high-quality company with some high-quality products, even though there's some near-term questions and clouds, if you're looking out over the years, over the decades, it's an acquisition that will probably work. So maybe they're being value investors. They're buying quality at a cheap price and expecting that over time it's going to work. Campaign.
Phil, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. As always, Phil Orlando, he is Federated Hermes. He is the man talking about the investment strategy there, chief equity market strategist and head of client portfolio as well. The Dodgers win again.
I know. This is a dynasty, right?
It is a dynasty, I think. I mean, having lived through the Yankees, I feel like I know what a dynasty when I see one, but they certainly have the capital to support it. But boy, 7 games, phenomenal World Series, one of the all-time great series that I've seen.
You watched some of Game 7.
Yes, but I mean, I'm not going. How many innings they went? I don't know. Phil,
they went to 11. I got to 10.
I'm not doing it. Randall Williams, Bloomberg Business of Sports reporter, joins us here in studio. Randall, I guess all parties involved, maybe the exception of the Toronto, feel like this was a heck of a World Series.
It's the best World Series I've ever seen.
Yeah,
definitely the best World Series I've ever seen. It had everything you want: high payroll, big market teams. From a culture aspect, you had the Kendrick and Drake battle coming back to life in the form of sports, of course. But incredible World Series from top to bottom, and they had 25 million viewers, which is incredible.
Yeah. And they went Game 7. I mean, so they maxed it out in terms of how long they could, keep this going for. November was when they actually, captured the World Series championship. And of course, you also had, what was it, Game 5 that went to 18 innings?
I think it was Game 3.
Game 3
went to 18. It's okay. It's okay. But
so the advertisers are happy too.
Of course. Advertisers, I think everybody involved except for the Blue Jays is probably very happy.
All right, so that's great for baseball, then pitchers and catchers in a few months, so we'll keep an eye on that. WNBA CBA negotiations, can you explain what's going on here? Because this is an important time for the WNBA. They're experiencing the greatest growth that I think they've ever had.
Absolutely.
And the highest profile I think they've ever had.
Of course.
It's critical time. It's a discussion about the economics.
They're intense labor negotiations. That's the bottom line. And so last Friday, Halloween, which was a somewhat poetic date, they had a deadline to hit, whether they could agree to terms on a new collective bargaining agreement, and they extended that deadline. The new deadline is now November 30th, so they have another, it's November 3rd, so they have another 27 days to either agree or maybe extend again, but this is relieving some of the pressure from both sides on that October 31st deadline. But now we're just in the exact same spot we were many months ago, which is, can they get to an agreement? At some point they will, but they haven't come to terms just yet.
And there's a real distrust between the league's players and the league itself. Kathy Engelbert, who's the commissioner of the WNBA. Walk us through where they don't see eye to eye and how they might bridge that.
Yeah, I think we saw things come to a boiling point with Nafisa Collier's comments a little over a month ago when she said the WNBA had the worst leadership in the world. That's one of the most aggressive comments I've ever heard a player make about a commissioner. And then it wasn't just her, it was a lot of players that backed her. And so it's clear that the trust has been lost between Kathy Engelbert and the players, and that makes the negotiations even tougher. Now, the CBA will eventually be agreed to, whether there's a lockout, whether there's a strike. But the question is for her and the players, how do they rebuild a relationship so that it is more healthy than what it is right now? Because right now, I don't think this is sustainable.
So what are the economic issues? Is it pay? Is it, I want to fly a jet, I want to do, I mean, because it seems like the growth is extraordinary. I'm not sure who's
so
getting
the players want rev share between the leagues and the teams. Now, the exact amount is to be determined, and the league sees it a different way. If they hit certain requirements, then that taps into the revenue sharing system. And so there is a real tense fight about about that. There's no question that on both sides of this agreement, from the player side and from the league side, that they will receive a tremendous salary increase. But the other benefits are also being negotiated as well. And if you can't get past the salary, then how do you get to things like health benefits, retirement benefits, minimum standards, and work conditions? All of those things are at the table for these negotiations and are very important to both the players and the league.
At the same time, you have some of those players. Nafisa Collier, you mentioned, is involved in this rival league called Unrivaled. Is that, making up any new ground given the labor issues between the WNBA and its players?
I think in some ways, but not. I don't think it's having a tremendous impact because the amount of players that can play in Unrivaled is just so much smaller than what the WNBA has. Now, there will be some players in the WNBA who play in Unrivaled who will make up their entire salary in Unrivaled alone. But with that in mind, again, this is, I believe Unrivaled is between 36 to 48 players, somewhere in that range. The WNBA will have, I believe it's at minimum 170 because they'll be adding 2 expansion teams. So it's a salary difference, a pay difference, a minimum worker count difference as well.
Speaking of expansion, what's the timeline for that? I mean, you've got these labor negotiations, which are becoming very stressful for both sides. The expansion plan is still set?
Yeah, I mean, both of the plans as far as expansion, draft, free agency, all of these things have ramifications for the CBA negotiations. The longer the negotiations go, the more that these deadlines could get picked, these dates could get pushed back and farther and farther and farther. So it's imperative that they come to terms, hopefully before we hit those expansion draft dates.
Wow. All right, Randall, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. As always, Randall Williams, he's U.S. sports business reporter for Bloomberg News. We appreciate him joining us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. But boy, it's the same in every league, every sport, every business. Maybe it's all about the money.
Except, for the WNBA, it was really compressed into this short amount of time, like 1 or 2 years, where Caitlin Clark came on the scene, the sport became really popular, and the numbers really backed that up. And now they're heading to the negotiating table.
And if anybody asked my advice, I would say go for a short TV deal, not a long one, because you're leaving money on the table, in my opinion. But nobody asked me, surprisingly. S&P up 8 points, the Dow minus 138, and the NASDAQ up 101 points. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Yeah,
CBS News Brief. We should learn today if the White House will comply with a judge's order to restart food assistance benefits on day 34 of the government shutdown. House Speaker Mike Johnson on Democratic calls to release contingency funds.
The way we always understood it was the contingency fund could not be used legally if the underlying fund was suspended.
The shutdowns caused a shortage of air traffic controllers and flight woes for passengers. CBS's Karen Hua in Houston.
Folks here today say they got here 5 hours early just out of an abundance of caution, but people are paying out of pocket for missing their flights, for having to spend money on food, Ubers, and hotels overnight.
CBS's Vicky Barker in London now on the legal action after a weekend attack.
The suspect in Saturday's mass stabbing attack on a London-bound train has been charged with 11 counts of attempted murder. Praise for the quick response. 8 minutes after the first emergency phone call, police were making an arrest.
CBS News Brief. I'm Steve Kathan.
Hey, high school students, are you ready for college? Need money to pay for college? If so, now is the time to apply for the 2026-2027 FAFSA. The FAFSA Federal Student Aid application is now open for next year and can help you secure grants, scholarships, and even student loans. Your friends at San Diego Miramar College's Financial Aid Office can guide you step by step through the process. Visit the Mira Mesa campus Monday through Friday or log on to sdmiramar.edu and search financial aid.
Hey player, the all-new Hamul Casino Resort is all yours. The hotel tower with some seriously luxurious suites. The super secret speakeasy. Hey, could you make that too? The indulgent spa retreat. And the epic rooftop pool in Cabanas. It's all for you at the all-new Hamul Casino Resort, the Players Place. Book your experience at HamulCasino.com.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Pfizer has filed a lawsuit against both Metsera and Novo Nordisk on antitrust grounds. Pfizer accuses Novo of trying to stifle competition in the obesity drug market. Novo is attempting to acquire obesity startup Metsera from under Pfizer, which was already in the process of buying the company. Pfizer accuses Novo of wanting to buy Metsera to kill a competitor in the lucrative weight loss drug market. The market's mixed to start the week with some tech gains as the Nasdaq is up around 0.4%, while the Dow is down about 0.5% with the S&P 500 slightly up. a sign that a growing number of borrowers are in poor financial health. The share of consumers in the subprime credit risk category has reached levels not seen since 2019. Subprime borrowers accounted for 14.4% of consumers tracked by credit reporting firm TransUnion in the third quarter. That's up 0.5% from the same period last year. The number of high-risk borrowers has grown for 4 consecutive years after shrinking during COVID-19. There is some good news, though, as consumers in the healthiest category, superprime, has continued to grow. Dan Schwartzman, Bloomberg Radio.
On a recent edition of the Big Take podcast, WNBA players want more of the league's revenue. Will they get it? Host David Gura explores what's on the line for one of the fastest-growing sports leagues in the world.
At this year's WNBA All-Star Game, players wore T-shirts that read, "Pay us what you owe us." It was a big statement. Here's ESPN reporter and Good Game host Sarah Spain.
So right now, they're getting less than 10% of the WNBA revenue, compared to about 50% that NBA players get. And at the crux of it is the league side wants them to get higher salaries, but they want their revenue to be affected by certain stipulations, a predetermined rate, whereas the players want their revenue to go up, their salary cap to go up, all of those things to be dependent on growth along with the revenue that they're creating for the league.
I want to dig into the revenue sharing piece of this a bit more, and you brought up the contrast between the WNBA and the NBA. So can you spell that out a bit more explicitly?
Well, we'll give you the extremes. Okay. So as of the most recent report, Steph Curry is the highest paid NBA player, plays for the Warriors, and Jackie Young is one of the highest paid WNBA, and Steph Curry makes 230 times as much money as Jackie Young. There was a great op-ed in the New York Times by Nobel Prize-winning economist Claudia Goldin, and one of the very tricky things about discussing this issue is that there is such a lack of financial transparency from the NBA, WNBA league side. So according to Claudia Goldin's numbers based on game attendance, TV viewership, all the other stuff, WNBA players should make somewhere around a quarter of what NBA players are making, and they're making an 80th.
That's what's on a recent edition of the Big Take podcast. Listen to the full episode on Apple, Spotify, the Bloomberg Business app with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, or anywhere you get your podcasts.
Dig into the revenue sharing piece of this a bit more.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the Dow lower, the S&P, NASDAQ. They are both advancing. Wall Street's broader stock market, those struggling to make headway, but tech shares keep climbing as Amazon's $38 billion deal with OpenAI adds fuel to the AI trade. We'll have a whole lot more with our Mandeep Singh coming up in just a moment. Right now, the S&P is up by 10 at 6850. That is a gain of just about 0.2%. The Dow down 142, lower by 0.3%. NASDAQ, meanwhile, up 118 points, up 0.5%. Amazon up by 4.6%. The 10-year, 4.11%. The 2-year, 3.60%. Gold now higher by $1 the ounce, holding above 4,000. 4,003 now, up under 0.1%. Crude up 7/10, 61.43 a barrel, and Bitcoin lower by 3.2%, 106,466 on Bitcoin. As for the Federal Reserve and the market backdrop, Phil Orlando is chief equity strategist at Federated Hermes, and moments ago here on Bloomberg Intelligence, he told us he sees more rate cuts ahead, and December is a done deal.
Despite what Jay Powell said last week, we think is going to continue through next year, where we do think there's another cut coming on December 10th. We do think there's 3 more cuts coming next year. Embedded in that, a leadership change at the Federal Reserve to more dovish leadership. So we're probably looking at a 3% funds rate by the end of next year.
Phil Orlando of Federated Hermes interviewed moments ago here on Bloomberg Intelligence. Deal-making news on this Monday. Eaton has agreed to buy liquid cooling specialist Boyd Thermal for $9.5 billion to capitalize on heavy demand related to AI data centers. Eaton is a more than century-old power management company. It's acquiring the Boyd unit from Goldman Sachs asset Asset Management. Eaton shares up 0.7%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet, with that Bloomberg Business Flash. And Charlie just mentioned AI data centers, and that is the buzzword for the day, the week, the month, the year. It just continues because Paul and I were just joking about how there's this headline that was basically clickbait. Amazon inking a $38 billion deal with OpenAI for NVIDIA chips. You've got Amazon, you've got OpenAI, you've got NVIDIA, and you've got a massive number, $38 billion. So let's bring in Mandeep Singh, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Tech Industry Analyst, on these latest developments. Mandeep, I've lost track of how many companies OpenAI has signed deals with. It feels like the bigger question is who has it not signed a deal with at this point?
That's a good way of framing it, but look, I mean, they have announced their intentions very clearly that they want to add up to 30 gigawatts of capacity. So in the end, it is all tied to that bigger goal of, adding 30 gigawatts. And just to put it in perspective, I mean, the entire gigawatt capacity of all the hyperscalers combined is around that ballpark, 30 gigawatts. So they are talking about, some big numbers in terms of capacity additions. How they will do it? One is through a deal with Oracle. So that was a $300 billion deal. Then they signed a $250 billion deal with Microsoft. So when you look at it from that perspective, $38 billion is not that big. And look, I mean, I can see what OpenAI is doing because they've seen, Anthropic sign a deal with Microsoft first, and then they signed a deal with Google TPU. So Anthropic and OpenAI are the purest plays when it comes to LLMs. And if Anthropic is getting all that compute capacity from the two hyperscalers that, OpenAI was doing business with, it was mostly Microsoft. And then Microsoft added Anthropic. So from that perspective, I can see why OpenAI wants to go to Amazon, which they haven't done so far.
It's an arms race, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anthropic, OpenAI, these are private companies, correct?
Yeah.
Where are they getting this cash for all these big purchases and investments and things? Am I missing the funding rounds here?
Well, so look at what they have done in terms of their valuation. OpenAI has grown to $500 billion in valuation this year. They started off the year at around $200 billion. So that just goes to show that every funding round, they have attracted more money. In fact, people are lining up to give them money. Now, I mean, granted, their revenue is still, the latest numbers are close to $15 billion in